Chapter 2604. Body of Six Paths of Reincarnation. Zhuowen's gaze was gloomy. He arrived in front of Lianmeng, who had just died. After confirming that she was indeed dead, his heart sank even more. He knew that although this woman who had just come out looked exactly like Lianmeng, he knew that this was not the real Lianmeng. "Taiqing, are you inside? Why are you hiding?" Zhuowen walked to the door at the end of the stone room and shouted coldly. Creak! The stone door slowly opened. The purple mist inside seemed to have substance, giving people a hallucinatory feeling. Zhuowen was vigilant, but he still stepped into the stone door. Behind the stone door was another stone room. However, this stone room was surrounded by purple mist, making it impossible to see what was inside. Vaguely, Zhuowen could see a figure sitting cross-legged in front of the purple mist. Beside this figure, a beautiful figure was silently kneeling beside him, looking extremely respectful. Zhuowen strode forward, parting the layers of purple mist and arriving before the cross-legged figure. The figure that appeared in front of Zhuowen was a sage-like old man in green clothes. At this moment, the old man in green clothes was sitting cross-legged on a green praying mat. His expression was peaceful and kind. Beside the old man in green clothes was a petite woman kneeling. This woman was Lianmeng. At this moment, Lianmeng's beautiful eyes were empty. She was muddle-headed like a walking corpse. The old man in green clothes slowly opened his eyes and stared at the white-clothed youth in front of him. He smiled and said, "Zhuowen, I didn't expect you to cultivate to such a level in just a few hundred years. Master is very gratified." Zhuowen sneered and said, "Taiqing, you and I are no longer master and disciple." The old man in green clothes did not mind and said indifferently, "You obtained the Zhuronggu and the Pangu banner, right?" Zhuowen frowned. He looked deeply at the old man and said, "How did you know?" Taiqing smiled and said, "Because I can sense that you are from Huaxiao on Earth. I think you know about the legend of Pangu and the relationship between the three pristines and Pangu, right?" Zhuowen looked puzzled. "If it's really as you say, then you're too weak compared to Pangu." However, Taiqing laughed out loud and said, "Zhuowen, you really don't know anything. Pangu's physical body turned into the 12 ancestral shamans and his primordial spirit turned into the 3 pure ones. The 3 pure ones were formed from Pangu's primordial spirit and had no physical body." Zhuowen's eyes flashed with realization. He understood what Taiqing meant. The 3 pure ones were only Pangu's primordial spirits and did not have a physical body. If he wanted to cultivate, he would have to rebuild his body and cultivate from scratch. Moreover, because the 3 pure ones were the primordial spirits of Pangu, their talents were definitely top-notch, and their cultivation speed was definitely very fast. If that was the case, it would also explain why Taiqing's strength could only be ranked as the master of Huaxia's heavenly region. Moreover, the 3 pure ones' strength should be more than this. However, because we had some conflicts with the 12 ancestral shamans, we had a great battle. Until now, the 3 pure ones have not completely recovered. This is also the reason why I'm willing to curl up in the 8 heavenly regions," Taiqing said calmly. "You should be the one who led me in through the stone statue, right? What's your purpose?" Zhuowen frowned. He knew very well that without Taiqing's permission, he, Zhuowen, would not be able to find the entrance to the statue in the Hall of Morals. Taiqing's gaze became extremely solemn. He looked at Zhuowen and said in a deep voice, "The 12 ancestral shamans and the 3 pure ones originated from the same source. Pangu opened up the chaos and formed the starry sky today. But do you know that since Pangu fell, this starry sky has been returning to the chaos?" Zhuowen was startled and revealed a puzzled expression. He did not quite understand the so-called returning to the chaos. The so-called returning to the chaos is the return of the entire world to its original state. The essence of this starry sky is chaos, and chaos does not have any substance, only chaotic energy. In other words, our starry sky is heading towards decline. The moment the starry sky returns to the chaos, this starry sky will usher in an unprecedented explosion. Then, all life and matter in the starry sky will perish and turn into chaos, forming a new chaotic world. And the chaotic world is what the heaven that killed Pangu wants. Zhuowen nodded. He could tell that Taiching did not seem to be lying. He also knew that Taiching should have a purpose for saying this. In today's world, I'm afraid that only a powerful existence like Pangu can split the chaos apart. Even if there are still third-step Dao-confirming experts guarding this starry sky and slowing down the chaos, only Pangu can split the chaos apart. Back then, the 3 Pure Ones negotiated with the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. We wanted to reach an agreement with them to recreate Pangu's divine might and split the chaos, but we failed and our relationship with the 12 ancestors of sorcerers became strained. So, the 3 Pure Ones represented the human race and the sorcerer race represented by the 12 ancestors of sorcerers broke off. In the end, the human race separated from the primitive heavenly domain and formed the Xianmi heavenly domain. The 3 Pure Ones were beaten back to our original form, leaving only the form of the nascent soul. Furthermore, the nascent soul was severely damaged. After saying that, Taiching silently looked at Zhuowen. He had already stated his purpose, and he knew that Zhuowen would definitely understand. Zhuowen lowered his head and pondered silently. Zhuowen had already heard about the enmity between the Xianmi heavenly domain and the primitive heavenly domain from Blood Scale, but he did not know the specific details. Now that the Grand Pure One revealed everything, Zhuowen finally came to a realization. In that case, the 3 Pure Ones are the heroes of the Xianmi heavenly domain. Why are you hiding in the 8 heavenly domains? Zhuowen said coldly. Taiching sneered. You underestimate the greed and jealousy of the human race. The human race respects the 3 Pure Ones because of our power. When we lose the power to deter them, do you think we can still survive? Zhuowen was silent. What Taiching said was not reasonable. Human nature was indeed the most complicated thing. It could quietly hurt you like a cold arrow. Furthermore, the nascent soul of the 3 Pure Ones has not fully recovered. Even if I return to the Xianmi heavenly domain, I will not make a big fuss. I will be careful. I am looking for you because I want to form a cooperative relationship with you. Although you only have an incomplete Zhurong venomous insect, you have the Pangu banner. It is not impossible for you to collect other venomous insects in the future. If you can cultivate the Pangu sacred body, you may have a great chance of splitting the chaos. Grand Pure One said slowly. Why should I believe you? Also, what did you do to junior sister Lianmeng? Zhuowen looked at the girl kneeling beside Taiching, and asked in an unfriendly tone. Taiching was not in a hurry. He looked at Zhuowen and said, Zhuowen, after Pangu fell, his nascent soul turned into the 3 Pure Ones, and his blood essence turned into the 12 ancestral sorcerers. However, you may not know that a small part of his blood essence turned into the 6 paths of reincarnation. I once told you that Lianmeng was born with an immortal body. However, that is not the case. She was born with the 6 paths of reincarnation. She can control the 6 paths of reincarnation and has a small part of Pangu's blood essence. Chapter 2605. 3 Pure Ones as 1 inch. I've spent countless years to finally activate Lianmeng's 6 paths of reincarnation ability. She'll play a crucial role in splitting open the chaos of this world, Taiching said solemnly. Zhuowen fell silent. Although he didn't completely believe Taiching's words weren't unreasonable and were reasonable. He had seen the chaos in the blood-stained horn. It was a terrifying environment that was even more empty than the void. If this starry sky really returned to the chaos, they would all be doomed. However, he didn't quite believe that Taiching was so noble that he only wanted to work with him to split open the chaos and maintain this starry sky world. He probably had other plans, so Zhuowen didn't really believe Taiching. Zhuowen, I know you don't believe me, and there's still some time before the chaos completely covers the starry sky. You and I are still too weak, so we can't deal with the chaos now. What we need now is to form a partnership and then cultivate with our own opportunities. When we're strong enough, we'll naturally meet again. Tai Tai said indifferently. Then, he flicked his finger and a fiery red bead flew out and landed in front of Zhuowen. Inside the fiery red bead was a fiery red insect that only had half of its body left. Moreover, the fiery red bead was emitting a heat wave like a furnace. The other half of the Zhuoronggu? Zhuowen looked at the red bead in his hand and narrowed his eyes. He didn't expect Tai Qing to have the other half of the Zhuoronggu. Tai Qing looked at Zhuowen's puzzled gaze and smiled faintly. You're wondering why I don't use the Zhuoronggu for myself, right? The Zhuoronggu is formed from one of Pangu's 12 purest drops of blood essence. It's the origin of the ancestor sorcerer. Ordinary bodies can't bear it. Even in the sorcerer tribe, only some unique and terrifying geniuses can bear the backlash of the ancestor sorcerer's goo. But you're different. You've cultivated 3 extreme realms with Devour King's body. You're much more terrifying than ordinary extreme realms. Originally, it was very risky for a cultivator of the 3 extremes to use the ancestral Magus venomous worms, but you still have the Pangu banner. Although the Pangu banner is incomplete, it is enough to subdue the backlash of the ancestral sorcery goo worms. Moreover, the Pangu banner can also repair its own flaws through the power of the ancestral sorcery goo worms. It can be said that they complement each other. Zhuowen fell silent, but there was no joy in his heart. Instead, it was heavy. The more the Grand Pure One acted like this, the more vigilant Zhuowen became. He knew that there was no free lunch in the world, but the Grand Pure One gave him the other half of the vermin of Zhurong and told him so many secrets without asking for anything in return. Zhuowen, the 8 heavens will soon become a land of trouble. Moreover, the naughty Shiva has successfully attained Tao. You'd better leave the 8 heavens as soon as possible. It's time for me to leave too. The Grand Pure One looked at Zhuowen with a smile. The surrounding purple fog gathered around the Grand Pure One. Then, Zhuowen discovered 2 other majestic figures in the purple fog on both sides of the Grand Pure One. Among the 2 figures, one of them was a rather sloppy old man. He was actually Yu Qing, who had gone to the heavenly armor planet with the Grand Pure One. At this moment, Yu Qing narrowed his eyes and grinned at Zhuowen. The 3 Pure Ones are even more amazing. The wonderful technique in the pot penetrates Mount Sumeru. Move a piece of wood to revive me and send away the clone Emolangi. The scattered immortal slayer has a shallow foundation and is completely selfless. You have to know that obedience is determined by the heavens. The disciples of Jie School are obsessed with themselves in vain. The Grand Pure One looked at Zhuowen deeply and recited a poem. Then, Zhuowen saw the Grand Pure One, Yu Qing, and Shangqing transform into 3 streams of clear qi with his own eyes. These 3 streams of clear qi merged into one and transformed into a long-bearded old man. This long-bearded old man was dressed in Taoist robes and sat on a candlestick seat. There was a bright halo behind his head, as if he had become a flying immortal. The 3 Pure Ones are one. I am the Grand Supreme Elder. Zhuowen, we'll meet again. I'll be waiting for you in the Xianmi heavenly region. If one day, when you're strong enough, I'll appear. The Grand Pure One's faint voice echoed in Zhuowen's ears, causing Zhuowen to be slightly absent-minded. When Zhuowen came back to his senses, he realized that the Grand Pure One had already disappeared. Lian Meng had also been taken away by the Grand Pure One. Zhuowen stood on the spot and was silent for a moment. Then, he strode out of the place. He knew that the Grand Pure One had already left. Although he did not know what the Grand Pure One's ultimate goal was, he knew that as long as he became stronger, that old fox, the Grand Pure One, would naturally reveal his foxtail. At that time, a battle between him and the Grand Pure One would be inevitable. Zhuowen had a feeling that after he accepted the Pangu banner, he seemed to be bound by the shackles of fate. However, Zhuowen was never one to submit to fate. If the shackles of fate wanted to bind him, then he would break through them with force. In the Hall of Virtue, countless cracks appeared on the surface of the Grand Pure One's statue before it finally collapsed. Zhuowen rushed out of a purple vortex and landed in the hall. "Why did you follow me?" Zhuowen stared at the figure at the front of the hall. At this moment, Myrtle Star Sovereign and Lan Ji were standing next to this figure, trembling with fear. The green-haired corpse raised his head and looked at Zhuowen with a complicated gaze. He said indifferently, "I can feel the aura of the Pengu origin spirit. This has nothing to do with you. You've already left the ominous vein and are free. There's no need for you to follow me. Leave," Zhuowen said coldly. The green-haired mummy crossed his arms in front of his chest, leaned against the red lacquer pillar behind him, and said, "I'm not familiar with this place. Since you're familiar with the starry sky of this era, I'll reluctantly let you be my guide." With that, the green-haired corpse sighed as if Zhuowen had taken advantage of him. Zhuowen's eyes were gloomy. He said coldly, "Sorry, I'm not interested in being your guide. I don't care where you want to go, but don't even think about following me. It's your honor to be my guide. It's decided," the green-haired corpse mumbled. Zhuowen's face darkened. He took a deep breath and said, "If you tell me where you came from, what's wrong with me bringing you along?" The green-haired corpse's eyes narrowed dangerously. He looked coldly at Zhuowen and said, "You want to know where I came from?" Zhuowen calmly met the corpse's gaze and didn't say anything. Chapter 2606. Purple Star Sovereign's decision. Zhuowen no longer paid any attention to the green-haired corpse. He knew that whether this guy had really lost his memory or not, it would not tell him his origin, so he simply stopped asking. If the green-haired corpse wanted to follow him, he did not mind. He could feel that since the Pengu banner entered his divine soul, the green-haired corpse had no hostility towards him. Although he did not know the reason, he knew that the green-haired corpse was not a big threat to him at present. "Lan Ji, the resources in this spirit ring are enough for you to cultivate to the peak of the 8 steps void sky. Take it. This is your reward for following me around." Zhuowen took out a spirit ring and threw it to Lan Ji. The latter caught the spirit ring with great joy and bowed to Zhuowen. Especially after seeing the rich resources in the spirit ring, Lan Ji could not stop smiling. He was glad that he had chosen the right master. "Brother Purple Star and I are leaving the Tian domain of China. You don't have to follow us. Let's part ways here." Zhuowen's next words made Lan Ji's body stiffen. He wanted to speak, but after seeing the indifference in Zhuowen's eyes, his heart trembled. He could only sigh and nod. Lan Ji stood on a peak of the Hall of Virtue, watching Zhuowen and Purple Star Sovereign turn into streams of light and disappear into the horizon. He felt a sense of loss in his heart. He thought he had found a powerful backer this time, but he did not expect to be sent away so quickly. Fortunately, Zhuowen was not a stingy person. At least, the spirit ring Zhuowen gave him made Lan Ji very satisfied. "Brother Zhuo, are you really going to take this guy with you?" On the space-time roulette, Purple Star Sovereign was sitting not far from Zhuowen. He looked at the green-haired corpse sitting on the other side and asked in surprise, "Brother Purple Star Sovereign, don't worry. He has no hostility towards us now. Moreover, I have something on me that makes him extremely wary. He won't dare to act recklessly," Zhuowen said. Crepe Myrtle Star nodded, but he sized up Zhuowen with a hesitant expression. "Brother Ziwei, if you have anything to say, just tell me." Crepe Myrtle Star hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "Brother Zhuo, to tell you the truth, have you already obtained the cultivation method after the 3 extremities?" Zhuowen was startled. He fell silent for a moment before nodding. Crepe Myrtle Star King looked happy, but he also felt embarrassed. Although he wanted the cultivation method, it was Zhuowen who had obtained it. It wasn't his, so he didn't want to ask Zhuowen for it. "Brother Ziwei, I won't hide the cultivation method of the three extremities from you. Su Liang is right. If you want to continue cultivating the three extremes, you have to learn the shaman tribe's cultivation method and plant gu in yourself. However, this method has a very high failure rate even for the shaman tribe, not to mention the human tribe. The result of failure is death. Do you still want to cultivate? Zhuowen looked at Crepe Myrtle Star King and said seriously. Zhuowen had obtained the cultivation method of the Pangu sacred body, so he had to use the gu of the ancestor. Naturally, he couldn't give it to Crepe Myrtle Star King. However, in the secret book of the shaman tribe provided by Su Liang, the Pangu sacred body was only one of the most powerful cultivation methods, and also the most dangerous one. Zhuowen could try it because he had the Pangu banner. However, if it was someone else, they would definitely die. Apart from that, there was the cultivation method of the ordinary shaman tribe. Through the ordinary gu, they could plant it in their body and walk on the cultivation method of the shaman tribe. Zhuowen didn't have the ordinary gu of the shaman tribe, but he had the gu of Zhurong. It was the gu of the ancestor of all gu. It wasn't difficult to produce a top-grade gu with a drop of the Zhurong gu's spirit blood. Moreover, the gu produced from the Zhurong gu's spirit blood would be much more powerful than the ordinary gu, and had much more potential. If Crepe Myrtle Star King really wanted to continue cultivating, Zhuowen could use this method. Crepe Myrtle Star King said without hesitation, "I've decided to continue cultivating, even if there is a risk of death. I need more power. Otherwise, the years to come will be too boring." Zhuowen looked at the determination in Crepe Myrtle Star King's eyes and nodded. "If you decide to continue cultivating, then I'll help you. I've already recorded the cultivation method of this secret book. Take it first." With that, Zhuowen took out a jade slip and handed it to Crepe Myrtle Star King. "What you lack now is a gu. I'll help you solve the problem of the gu. I'll be in seclusion for a while. When I come out, I'll bring you the gu you need." As Zhuowen spoke, he summoned Xiaohei. After instructing this guy to control the space-time roulette and leave Huaxia Heavenly Domain for Dafan Heavenly Domain, Zhuowen began his seclusion. After setting up a temporary cave residence in the space-time roulette, Zhuowen sat leisurely inside and took out 2 fiery red balls. These 2 fiery red balls each had half of the gu of Zhurong. Moreover, they were constantly squirming, as if they had sensed the other half of themselves. They were extremely restless. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a serious expression. He put the 2 balls together. Suddenly, a terrifying flame burst out, and then a sharp whistling sound pierced through the sky. Soon after, Zhuowen saw the 2 halves of the Zhurong venomous insect fuse together and become a complete venomous insect. After the gu of Zhurong was complete, it immediately rushed toward Zhuowen, making a sharp whistling sound. The whistling sound was full of hostility. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He did not expect that the gu of Zhurong would betray him after combining. However, when the gu of Zhurong was a few feet away from Zhuowen, it seemed to feel an extremely fearful aura. It screamed and turned a corner, wanting to leave this place. Want to leave? No way. Zhuowen's gaze was sharp, and his right hand suddenly made a grabbing motion, directly grabbing the fleeing Zhurong worm in his hand. Then, he immediately activated the Pangu sacred body, wanting to refine the gu of Zhurong immediately. At this moment, the gu of Zhurong was constantly screaming, and its whistling was full of fear. Zhuowen knew that the gu of Zhurong should be afraid of the Pangu banner in his divine soul. Because of fear, the gu of Zhurong did not even dare to fight back. It could only let Zhuowen activate the Pangu sacred body to refine the entire gu of Zhurong. Zhuowen created an avatar of King Devourer. The power of the 3 extremes was like a sky-burning fire. It rolled over and wrapped the gu of Zhurong. Moreover, the secret codex of the sorcerer tribe gushed out of Zhuowen's body. Strange runes rushed out of the codex. These runes rushed into the gu of Zhurong. Every time a rune entered, the gu of Zhurong would scream miserably. Its voice was full of anger, but it was afraid of the aura of the Pangu banner, so it did not dare to act rashly. Countless runes turned into a black cocoon the size of a thumb. This black cocoon was completely formed by dense and strange runes. Because the runes were so dense, it really looked like a cocoon if one did not look carefully. Chapter 2607. Gu Fusion. The first step of cultivating the Pangu sacred body is to fuse with the Gu. As long as I can completely fuse with the Gu of Zhurong, I will be qualified to cultivate the Pangu sacred body. The process of fusing with the Gu was extremely painful. Zhuowen had already learned about it from the secret manual. This was also something that all Sorcerer Tribe members had to go through to prove their Tao. If they couldn't endure it, they would die. Only by enduring it could they embark on the path of the strong. When the black cocoon swept into Zhuowen's glabella, Zhuowen immediately groaned in pain. His whole body twitched and his veins burst. He looked extremely ferocious. This kind of pain was like someone crushing your bones one by one until all the bones in your body were crushed. This kind of pain was thousands of times more painful. Even though Zhuowen's willpower was as strong as iron, he still wanted to commit suicide because of this terrible pain. Fortunately, Zhuowen had set up many large formations in this temporary cave residence, including a soundproof formation. Therefore, Zhuowen's shrill scream was not heard by the others on the space-time roulette. However, the green-haired mummy, who was sitting cross-legged not far away, slowly opened his eyes. He glanced at the temporary cave residence that Zhuowen had set up, and his eyes were filled with doubt and solemnity. The moment the black cocoon fused with Zhuowen's glabella, countless black runes drilled out of his glabella like worms. They crawled all over Zhuowen's body and covered his entire body. Soon, Zhuowen's entire body turned into a giant black cocoon. As countless runes surrounded him, the black of these runes was gradually replaced by a fiery red color. It was as if a force was awakening. Zhuowen's original body stood not far away and silently looked at his doppelganger. The muscles on his face were constantly twitching. After all, his original body and doppelganger were connected. Therefore, his original body also felt part of the pain that his doppelganger was experiencing. Although only a small part of the pain was transmitted, his original body was still a little crazy. This showed how terrible the pain his doppelganger was experiencing this time. "I hope we can make it through," Ji Hao murmured worriedly. He knew that if his clone couldn't make it, he would lose such a powerful clone, and he might not be able to control the Zhurong bug, which had gone out of control. Time ticked by. A month later, Crepe Myrtle Star Lord and Xiao He looked worriedly at the cave abode that Zhuowen had set up. "Brother Zhuo should be fine, right?" Crepe Myrtle Star muttered to himself. "This kid is very lucky. He should be fine," Xiao He said in an uncertain tone. The green-haired mummy sneered in disdain, not saying a word. Rumble. Suddenly, Zhuowen's temporary abode collapsed with a bang, and then a white-clothed young man walked out slowly. Beside the white-clothed youth stood a black-clothed youth. The black-clothed youth looked exactly the same as the white-clothed youth, and his aura was more violent and horrible than before. In addition, there was a very small flame star between the eyebrows of the black-clothed youth. Although it was very small, it was vivid, as if a small flame was burning endlessly between the eyebrows of the youth. The green-haired mummy narrowed his eyes and looked at the black-clothed youth in surprise. In a voice that only he could hear, he murmured to himself, "This guy succeeded in fusing the bug, and it took him such a short time. Brother Crepe Myrtle, take this bug. If you really think it through, you can practice according to the practice method I gave you. I will protect you." Zhuowen pointed with his index finger, and a flame appeared at the tip of his finger. Upon closer inspection, there was a tiny goo worm wriggling within the flame. This bug was made from a drop of Zhurong's blood essence that Zhuowen took out. Among all the bugs, it was considered a very powerful bug of high quality. Crepe Myrtle Star took out the flame excitedly and bowed deeply to Zhuowen. "Brother Zhuowen, I can't thank you enough. I will remember this favor. Zhuowen nodded, waved his sleeve, and set up a new cave on the spot. He said, Brother Crepe Myrtle, you can practice in this cave for the rest of the time. It is very safe here. Crepe Myrtle Star cupped his fists again and excitedly went into the cave. Obviously, he was going to refine the bug. Xiaohei, where are you now? Have you left the Huaxia heavenly region? Zhuowen asked. Xiaohei looked at the star map on the spacetime roulette and said, There is still half a month before we leave the Huaxia heavenly region. Because you are in seclusion, I did not go at full speed, so it will take a long time. Zhuowen nodded and did not intend to speed up. After all, Crepe Myrtle Star was also in seclusion. If he went too fast, it would have a big impact on his seclusion. Zhuowen found a random place and sat cross-legged on the ground. He began to stabilize the Pangu sacred body of his clone. Zhuowen knew that he had not even reached the beginner level of the Pangu sacred body. He was only qualified to cultivate it. However, the effect of the Zhurong bug was too heaven-defying. Just by fusing the bug, Zhuowen found that the strength of his clone had increased by a lot. In particular, the flame that his clone had now mastered was not an ordinary flame. It could burn anything and was extremely terrifying. In the past, the strength of his clone might only be a little stronger than that of the half-step Heavenly Path Master. But now, Zhuowen was sure that the half-step Heavenly Path Master could be defeated with just one punch. Even if the real Heavenly Path Master appeared, Zhuowen was confident that he could defeat him. Maybe it's time to look for Sakyamuni. Zhuowen thought of Sakura and a trace of a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Back on the Heavenly Armor planet, Sakyamuni had played him and all the living beings on the Heavenly Armor planet. Zhuowen had never forgotten this hatred. Back then, Zhuowen did not have the strength, so he could not do anything to Sakyamuni. But now, Zhuowen's strength was no longer afraid of the Heavenly Path Master. So what if the naughty Shiva successfully attained the Tao? Half a month later, the space-time roulette stopped. Zhuowen opened his eyes and looked at Xiaohei. Xiaohei, what's wrong? Kid, the exit of the Huaxiao heavenly territory has been blocked. And it looks like there's a lot of them. What's going on? Xiaohei asked. Zhuowen stood up and looked ahead. Indeed, the exit of the Huaxia heavenly territory was guarded by many cultivators. These cultivators wore the same armor, and their gazes were solemn. They were even more strict with the cultivators passing by, as if they were looking for something. Just go ahead. If possible, Xiaohei, you can use force. After Zhuowen finished speaking, he sat cross-legged on the deck again. He scanned the area with his divine sense and found that the strongest cultivator guarding the exit of the Huaxia heavenly territory was only Void Sky level 7. With this level of cultivation, even Xiaohei could kill him with one finger, let alone him. Zhuowen had no interest in these cultivators. After all, they were not on the same level. When Xiaohei controlled the spacetime roulette to land at the exit, 2 guards immediately came forward to search them. Get lost. Chapter 2608. Liang Palace. The moment Xiaohei made her move, the surroundings fell silent. Whether it was the cultivators guarding this camp or the cultivators who were planning to leave the heaven realm of Huaxia, they all looked at the Xiaohei dog who was sitting on the hilt of a black sword on the spacetime wheel in surprise. As for Zhuowen and the green-haired mummy on the spacetime roulette, they were ignored by these people. After all, Xiaohei had stolen all the limelight back then. How dare you kill my Liang Palace's people? A guard shouted angrily. Immediately, the dozens of cultivators guarding the entrance took out their respective divine artifacts and attacked the spacetime roulette. Many of the surrounding cultivators shook their heads. They felt that the owner of the time-space roulette was too reckless. He actually attacked without any reason. Wasn't this clearly going against Sunrise Palace? Liang Palace was a first-rate power in China's heaven domain. It was said that Liang Palace had a peak Void Sky 8th step expert overseeing it. Apart from those hegemonic powers in China's heaven domain's Tai Ching immortal realm, There really wasn't any other power that could contend against Liyang Palace. Just as the onlookers were shaking their heads and sighing, the dozens of guards who had rushed over let out endless screams. They were all sent flying, and many of them died on the spot. So powerful! Everyone looked at Xiao He, who was still sitting on the sword hilt, in disbelief and awe. They knew that Li Yanggong had kicked an iron plate. This Xiao He dog was not simple. After all, those dozens of guards were all Void Sky experts, yet they were defeated so easily. Clearly, this Xiao He dog's strength far surpassed those guards. What happened? A dignified voice was transmitted over. Immediately, a middle-aged man rushed out from the cave that was hidden in the darkness beside the entrance. He looked at the Xiao He dog on the spacetime roulette and cupped his fist. "Brother, may I know who you are? Why did he attack without distinguishing between right and wrong? You must know that we are from Liyang Palace." Xiao He looked at the middle-aged man with disdain and sneered. "What is Liyang Palace? I don't even care about the Tauda Hall. Is your Liyang Palace stronger than the Tauda Hall?" Everyone was in an uproar. They looked at Xiao He as if they were looking at an idiot. The Tauda Palace was recognized as the #1 power in Huaxia Heaven Domain because the Lord of Heaven Domain was the founder of the Tauda Palace. Xiao He naturally did not care about what these people thought. In his opinion, although Taiqing was strong, Zhuowen was not weak either. Even if he faced Taiqing head-on, Zhuowen was not afraid. Moreover, Zhuowen had told him that the Grand Pure One had already left the 8 heavens. No matter how arrogant he was, the Grand Pure One wouldn't cause trouble for him. Humph! Arrogant bastard! The middle-aged man was unable to restrain his anger and attacked. Unfortunately, Xiao He only slashed out once and the middle-aged man's right hand exploded into a bloody mist. The middle-aged man grunted and retreated. He looked at Xiao He in shock. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent. "Scram! I want to leave Huaxia Heaven Domain. Your Liyang Palace has no right to stop me," Xiao He said coldly. The middle-aged man fell silent. He immediately stepped aside and lowered his head. He did not dare to refute Xiao He. The middle-aged man was no fool. After knowing that Xiao He's strength was so terrifying, he knew that if he continued to block in front, he would only lose his life. Xiao He raised his head arrogantly and drove the spacetime roulette towards the exit. Zhuowen looked at Xiao He's arrogant expression and found it funny. He knew that this guy's personality had not changed at all. Xiao He, stop first!" Zhuowen suddenly exclaimed. Just as Xiao He was about to drive the spacetime roulette into the exit, Zhuowen spoke. "What's wrong?" Xiao He stopped the spacetime roulette and looked at Zhuowen in confusion. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a hint of joy. He took out 2 keys from his spiritual ring. The 2 keys were black and white. They were simple and unadorned. The spacetime rules lingered around them. The green-haired mummy looked at the 2 keys that Zhuowen took out and exclaimed. His eyes revealed a look of interest. The 2 black and white keys floated in the air and trembled. Finally, they both pointed in a certain direction. It was as if there was something in that direction that attracted the 2 keys. Zhuowen was excited. He knew that the only thing that could make the 2 keys behave strangely was the 3rd key. Zhuowen looked in the direction that the 2 keys were pointing in. That direction happened to be where the crowd of onlookers was. Zhuowen looked at the crowd of onlookers and instantly locked onto a sneaky figure. This sneaky figure also noticed Zhuowen's gaze. Like a bird startled by the twang of a bough, he immediately dove into the crowd and quickly fled. The direction that this person was fleeing in was the exit of the Huaxia Heavenly Domain. Since Zhuowen knew that the 2 keys were acting strangely because of this person, he naturally would not let this person escape so easily. Therefore, he immediately stretched out his right hand. The invisible hand formed by divine power was extremely fast. In an instant it fell on the top of that person's head and then slammed down. A pained cry rang out, and the sneaky figure was immediately slapped to the ground by the giant hand made of divine power. This person was wearing a thick black coat and a large black hat on his head. There were traces of God-forbidding restrictions on his body. Obviously, he was hiding from something. Zhuowen took a step forward and landed in front of this person. With a flick of his finger, the person's black coat and hat were all torn to pieces. The God-forbidding restrictions that surrounded the person's body were also destroyed by Zhuowen. When he saw the person's true appearance, Zhuowen was stunned. This was because the person in front of him was actually a little girl who was no more than 12 years old. This little girl's eyes were misty. She looked at Zhuowen with grievance. Her expression was enough to soften the heart of a man with a strong heart. However, Zhuowen's gaze was cold. He could feel that this little girl's true age was at least older than him. Her cultivation was also in the virtual sky world. She was probably at the 3rd level of the virtual sky world. Zhuowen put away the 2 time and space keys. His powerful divine sense scanned the little girl's body from head to toe. However, his brows were tightly knitted. He did feel the aura of the time and space key on this little girl, but he did not find any trace of the time and space key on this little girl. With Zhuowen's current powerful divine sense, it was not difficult for him to quietly enter the little girl's spirit ring and investigate the things in her spirit ring. However, the result of Zhuowen's investigation was extremely disappointing. However, Zhuowen was sure of one thing. Since this little girl had the aura of the time and space key, she must have come into contact with the 3rd time and space key. She might even know the whereabouts of the 3rd time and space key. Chapter 2609. Sure family, you should recognize the 2 keys I took out just now, right? Zhuowen said indifferently. The little Loli's pupils shrank as she turned her head and said, I don't recognize them. Little girl, if I wanted to kill you, it would be as simple as moving a finger. I think it's best if you don't show your stubbornness in front of me. Otherwise, I will lose my patience. Zhuowen's voice was indifferent as he looked at the little Loli with eyes full of killing intent. An invisible pressure was released and pressed down on the little Loli, causing her delicate body to sway. Sure family's remnant, you really are here. You really hid yourself well. It seems like we didn't have to put in any effort to find you. Suddenly, the middle-aged man from Liang Palace looked at the little Loli with a happy expression. However, the middle-aged man didn't lose his mind because of this. Instead, he respectfully came before Zhuowen and cupped his fists. Senior, this person is a wanted criminal of our Liang Palace. We are guarding this place for this person. I hope that Senior can give this person to us for the sake of Liang Palace. I represent Liang Palace to thank you. Although the middle-aged man had never seen the white-clothed youth in front of him fight, he could tell that the white-clothed youth wasn't simple from Xiao Hei's attitude. Therefore, the middle-aged man didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect to this person. What is Liang Palace? Is it worth me giving you face? Zhuowen indifferently turned his head and looked at the middle-aged man. A wave of killing intent burst out like a sharp sword and suddenly shot out. Poochie! The middle-aged man's eyes were filled with shock as he spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. He heavily smashed into the ground and his body twitched. He could only struggle on the ground. Everyone was in an uproar. Just the killing intent released was enough to seriously injure a Void Sky 7th step expert like the middle-aged man. Just how strong was this person? Even a Void Sky 8th step expert couldn't do this. The little Loli looked at the middle-aged man who was seriously injured by Zhuowen and then looked at Zhuowen. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of light. You should know about the space-time key, right? Zhuowen didn't even look at the middle-aged man. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the little Loli seriously. The little Loli Xiao Hei rolled her eyes and said in a clear voice, I do know about the space-time key, and its color is different from yours. The one I saw was red, but if you want to get the space-time key, you have to promise me one thing. Zhuowen furrowed his brows. Although he was much stronger than this little lowly, Zhuowen really couldn't bring himself to take the initiative to snatch something from the weak. After all, this was already a matter of principle. Zhuowen believed in the principle of not offending others if others did not offend him. Therefore, he could not be as ruthless as other cultivators and take things by force. As long as I can do it, I will promise you. Zhuowen nodded. The little lowly's beautiful eyes lit up as she let out a sigh of relief. She knew very well that the stronger an expert was, the less they valued life. Killing and seizing was a common thing for them. She said those words because she felt that this white-clothed youth was different from other experts. This white-clothed youth didn't have the feeling of indifference to life. My condition is to help me kill the young palace master of Sunrise Palace and rescue the Sure clan members captured by Sunrise Palace. The little lowly's beautiful eyes revealed a trace of hatred. After saying that, the little lowly looked at Zhuowen with some apprehension. The little lowly had always known that Liang Palace was very powerful. She had sought help from many experts, but because Liang Palace was too powerful, no one dared to agree to his conditions. Some experts even attacked her in order to curry favor with Sunrise Palace. If it wasn't for her good escape methods, she would have been a prisoner of Sunrise Palace by now. Although this white-clothed youth looked very strong, Sunrise Palace wasn't just one person, but a huge force. In the little lowly's view, this white-clothed youth's cultivation was at most at the 8th step of the void sky, while the ancestor of Sunrise Palace was at the peak of the 8th step. She was afraid that this white-clothed youth would choose to retreat after hearing about Sunrise Palace's prestige. However, to the little lowly's surprise, the white-clothed young man before her just nodded and said, "Oh, that's easy. Take me to Liang Palace. After I'm done with these things for you, you should hand over the space-time key to me." "You are not afraid of Sunrise Palace?" the little lowly asked in surprise. Zhuowen slightly frowned and lightly said, "Why should I be afraid of Sunrise Palace? Does Sunrise Palace have a Tao vindication expert?" The little lowly awkwardly smiled, but she didn't believe Zhuowen in her heart. She felt that Zhuowen was bragging. However, she had gone out this time to find an elite to save her clansmen. Now that she had finally found Zhuowen, someone who was willing to help her, she couldn't refute him even though she knew that he was blowing his own trumpet. Otherwise, it would be terrible if she ruined his interest. "You know the location of Sunrise Palace, right?" Zhuowen asked indifferently. "I know." The little lowly nodded and said, "Then sit on my flying divine tool." Zhuowen didn't allow her to explain. He lifted the little lowly by the back of her collar and placed her on the space-time roulette. He also sat cross-legged on the deck of the space-time roulette. "Little girl, you really lost out. Using a space-time key in exchange for this brat going to Sunrise Palace to save your clan members, and only killing a young palace lord. You have to know that this brat can destroy Sunrise Palace as easily as blowing off dust." After the little lowly was placed on the deck by Zhuowen, Xiao He quickly came closer and said with a smile. The little lowly forced a smile. She felt that these people were crazy. Sunrise Palace was a first-rate force in the Huaxia domain, but in their words it was like a cat or a dog that could be easily dealt with. "Xiao He, you talk too much. Hurry up and drive the space-time roulette." Zhuowen's voice sounded. Xiao He shrugged and drove the space-time roulette away from the exit of the Huaxia domain, following the little lowly's instructions. Sunrise Palace was located in the southern part of the Huaxia domain, occupying 40% of the southern territory. It could be said that it was the largest force in the southern part of the Huaxia domain. On the way to Sunrise Palace, Zhuowen and the little lowly didn't talk much. However, the little lowly and Xiao He talked a lot. During this time, the Purple Star Sovereign also came out of seclusion. Zhuowen knew that the Purple Star Sovereign should have succeeded in his cultivation. In the future, the Purple Star Sovereign would embark on the path of cultivation of the sorcerer tribe. At the same time, from the conversation between the little lowly and Xiao He, Zhuowen also found out that the little lowly's name was Shi Dai. She was the second daughter of the Shi family. The Shi family was also a force in the southern part of the Huaxia domain. However, compared to a colossus like Sunrise Palace, the difference was not small. Originally, the Shi family and Sunrise Palace didn't have any grudges. However, one day, Sunrise Palace suddenly surrounded the Shi family and captured all the Shi family members. Later, the Shi family found out that the young palace master of Sunrise Palace had taken a fancy to the Shi family's eldest daughter. This was because the eldest daughter didn't like the young palace master of Sunrise Palace and rejected him. The young palace master flew into a rage out of humiliation and sent experts from Sunrise Palace to surround the Shi family and capture all the Shi family members. Chapter 26:10. Attacking Liang Palace. We'll be arriving at Liang Palace soon. Oh right, it's best if we disguise ourselves and sneak into Liang Palace. This is the safest way. Shi Dai stood up and looked at the starry sky in front of her. In the distant starry sky, she could vaguely see a vast continent floating in the starry sky. This continent was very large and boundless. There were many dazzling palaces inside. Zhuowen's divine sense had already detected this continent from far away. This continent was definitely the largest one Zhuowen had ever seen. It could be seen that this continent wasn't naturally formed, but rather pieced together by many meteorites and boulders. This Liang Palace is really extravagant. They actually spent so much effort to piece together such a large continent. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was very clear that even cultivators would need to spend a lot of manpower and wealth to piece together such a large continent. Senior, what are you doing? Why are you directly rushing towards the core area of Liang Palace? Shi Dai originally wanted to persuade Zhuowen to first land on the continent, then disguise himself and slowly sneak into Liang Palace. Shi Dai's main goal was to save the Shi clan members. As for killing the young palace lord, that was only secondary. However, she didn't expect that Zhuowen would immediately rush towards the core area of Liang Palace like a suicide mission. That place was an important location of Liang Palace. It was the residence of the important figures of Liang Palace. There were as many experts as the clouds, and it was heavily guarded. Even an expert at the peak of the 8th step of the Void Sky realm would die if they tried to force their way in. Moreover, in Shi Dai's eyes, this Zhuowen was only an 8th step Void Heaven cultivator. Rushing in like this was the same as courting death. Little miss, don't worry. Although I know you're worried about the cultivators of Liang Palace, don't worry. This brat Zhuowen knows his limits. Xiao He controlled the spacetime roulette and smiled at Shi Dai. Shi Dai was dumbfounded. What was going on? She was worried about them. How could this Xiao He invert right and wrong? Moreover, Shi Dai couldn't understand why these people were so confident. Previously, she thought they were just boasting. She didn't expect that they would really try to force their way into Liang Palace. At this moment, Shi Dai was so anxious that she was about to cry. She knew that once Zhuowen's group rushed into Liang Palace, they would die without a doubt. Not only would her Shi clan members not be able to save them, but her life as well. You bunch of lunatics, put me down. I'm not going to die with you, Shi Dai hurriedly said. At this moment, Zhuowen had no time to care about the crying Shi Dai. With a wave of his sleeve, a powerful divine power immediately imprisoned Shi Dai. Liang 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 Palace Liang Palace Liang Palaces Help Liang Palace Liang 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 Yang Liang Palace Palace Liang Liang Palace. At this moment, at the core of the continent, palaces stood in great numbers. They were dazzling with gold and jade. In this core area there were powerful restrictions surrounding it. At the center of these palaces, there was a golden palace that stood out like a crane among chickens. Above this palace, there was a halo that looked like the blazing sun at dawn. From afar, it looked like the blazing sun rising at dawn. This was the real Liang Palace. It was a powerful force that ruled the entire continent as well as the southern part of Huaxia Heaven Domain. It was second only to the 100 halls of Taiqing Immortal Realm. At this moment, in front of Liyang Palace's majestic gate, there were 2 guards in mighty armor standing on both sides of the gate. "Look, what's that? It seems like there's a flying divine tool approaching, and it's heading straight for our Liyang Palace." One of the guards pointed at the space-time roulette that was approaching in the sky. Another guard also saw the approaching space-time roulette and said disdainfully, "I wonder which guy is overestimating himself. It seems like he wants to break into our Liyang Palace. He's really courting death." You should know that the restrictions around our Liyang Palace were set up by a level 9 divine array master from the Taiqing Immortal Realm at a high price. The guard nodded and leisurely leaned on the doorpost. He looked at the approaching flying divine tool with ridicule. In their opinion, there was a good show to watch. Rumble! Suddenly, the flying divine tool surpassed the speed of sound and crashed into the Liyang Palace's restriction. Then, an invisible shockwave swept out in all directions. A terrifying earthquake rocked the entire continent. The Liyang Palace's restriction only lasted for a breath's time before it was completely shattered. The 2 guards who were leaning on the doorpost to watch the show froze. They didn't even have time to change their expressions before their necks were pierced by 2 streaks of divine power, and they fell to the ground. Enemy attack! Someone broke the palace protecting array. Everyone move out and destroy the intruder. Which bastard is it? How dare he attack our Liyang Palace? He must be tired of living. The moment the Liyang Palace's restriction was broken, it immediately attracted the attention of many experts inside the Liyang Palace. Then, one figure after another rushed out of the Liyang Palace. The guards of the Liyang Palace were like locusts as they swarmed towards the entrance of the Liyang Palace. He actually used brute force to break the Liyang Palace's restriction. Is this guy a monster? Sure Dai stood stiffly on the deck of the space-time roulette. She looked on helplessly as Zhuo approached Liyang Palace's restriction and suddenly punched out, shattering it. In Sure Dai's opinion, such an unbelievable power was too illusory. Sure Dai knew that the Liyang Palace's restriction wasn't an ordinary array. It was a true level 9 defensive array. Zhuo leaped out of the space-time roulette and walked to the entrance of the Liyang Palace. He instructed Xiao He, I'll leave the rest to you. Xiao He grinned and said, "No problem. Leave it to me. I haven't exercised my muscles for a long time." As Xiao He spoke, he turned into a thunderfire and wrapped the thunderfire sword around Zhuo. Any guards or experts that came from the Liyang Palace would be chopped into pieces by the thunderfire sword the moment they got close to Zhuo. Zhuo put away the space-time roulette. Crepe Myrtle Star Monarch and the green-haired corpse tacitly followed behind Zhuo. The restriction on Sure Dai's body was also removed. She could only brace herself and follow. However, the more Sure Dai followed, the more alarmed she became. She realized that no matter how many experts appeared from the Liyang Palace, they would all be killed by the thunderfire sword around Zhuo. Chapter 26:11. Liu the terrifying thunderfire was like an angry dragon as it exploded in the entire Liyang Palace. This thunderfire was like the most loyal guard as it surrounded Zhuo and the rest. Any cultivator who approached would have to endure the terror of the thunderfire. Zhuo had his hands behind his back as he slowly walked towards the tallest palace in the Liyang Palace area. His gaze was calm, as if nothing in this world could cause him to waver. Sure Dai followed behind and looked at the white-clothed youth, who had his hands behind his back, as he slowly walked forward. She had the illusion that this person was invincible. Looking at the cultivators who kept dying in Liyang Palace, Sure Dai had mixed feelings. She knew that she had greatly underestimated the man in front of her. However, Sure Dai was also extremely glad that she was able to find an expert like Zhuo. The stronger Zhuo was, the greater the hope of saving her clansmen. Nearly 100 Liyang Palace cultivators were like moths to a flame. When they tried to kill Zhuowen, they all fell under the power of the Thunder Fire Sword. The remaining Liyang Palace cultivators who appeared all revealed fearful expressions. They surrounded Zhuowen and the rest from afar, not daring to approach at all. "Sir, who are you? Why are you trespassing into my Liyang Palace?" Suddenly, from the tallest palace, a middle-aged man dressed in a luxurious golden robe led a group of people into the palace. When the middle-aged man walked out of the palace and discovered that nearly 100 elites had died, anger flashed across his eyes. However, his gaze quickly landed on Zhuowen and the thunder fire sword that surrounded Zhuowen and the rest. A trace of fear flashed across his eyes. He could feel that the thunder fire sword surrounding Zhuowen was extremely terrifying. It actually gave him a sense of death. It could be seen that the thunder fire sword was definitely not an ordinary divine sword. "Palace Master! Palace Master!" The cultivators who surrounded Zhuowen and the rest from afar all landed around the middle-aged man in golden luxurious clothes. They looked at Zhuowen with fear in their eyes. Zhuowen stopped and raised his head. He looked at the middle-aged man indifferently and said, "You are the Palace Master of Liyang Palace?" The middle-aged man cupped his fists at Zhuowen and said, "That's right. Your Excellency is very strong. You shouldn't be a nobody. Now that you attacked my Liyang Palace without any explanation, you should at least give me an explanation, right?" Zhuowen shook his head and said, "You are not qualified for me to give you an explanation. I came to Liyang Palace for the Shi family." "A member of the Shi family?" The middle-aged man was startled. His eyes were filled with confusion. When Zhuowen saw the expression on the middle-aged man's face, he knew that the Shi clansmen were captured by the Liyang Palace. This man didn't know about it. It seems like the Liyang Palace's young palace master secretly sent people to capture the Shi clansmen. "By the way, I think you can ask your son about the Shi family. I heard that the Shi family was captured by the young palace master of Liyang Palace." Zhuowen stood quietly in the same place, calmly looking at the middle-aged man. The calmer Zhuowen was, the more pressure the middle-aged man felt. He could feel that even if he took action, he might not be able to deal with the white-clothed youth in front of him. If he wanted to deal with the white-clothed youth, he knew that the only way was to send out the old ancestor of Liyang Palace. However, the old ancestor was the foundation of Liyang Palace. Moreover, the old ancestor was in the critical period of a breakthrough. He naturally couldn't rashly awaken the old ancestor. "This little bastard, why is he always causing trouble for me? Now he has provoked such an existence." The middle-aged man's heart was filled with hatred. He immediately cupped his hands politely to Zhuowen and said, "Brother, I don't know about the Shi clansmen. If it is really my son who did it, I will immediately go find him and ask him to hand over the Shi clansmen. Moreover, Liyang Palace is willing to compensate you to appease your anger." Zhuowen stood in the same place and didn't speak. He only looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man quickly ordered his subordinates to call the young palace master. Not long after, the subordinate brought in a young man who was dressed more luxuriously than the middle-aged man. However, the young man's face was filled with impatience. When he came to the middle-aged man's side, he said with some annoyance, "I say, father, why did you call me over? I was just having fun, and you sent someone to disturb me. It's very disappointing, okay?" The middle-aged man slapped the young man's face. The latter covered his face and was stunned for a moment. He then screamed, "Father, are you crazy? You actually hit me. I remember that you have never hit me before, right?" Zhuowen looked at the crazy young man with a mocking gaze and secretly shook his head. This young man was a typical good-for-nothing. His cultivation was extremely ordinary and his footsteps were unsteady. It was obvious that he was immersed in wine and women all year round. "Did you capture the Shi clansmen?" The middle-aged man suppressed his anger and asked. He also knew that his son was extremely useless. However, he was still his flesh and blood, so he had always doted on him. Although he knew that his son used his identity as the young palace master of Liang Palace to stir up trouble everywhere, he was basically active within Liang Palace. Basically, he would not provoke anyone that Liang Palace could not afford to provoke. Now, because his son had captured the Sher clansman, he had provoked the terrifying young man in white. This made the middle-aged man hate his son for not living up to his expectations. The young man frowned slightly and said, "Yes, father. The Sher clan is just an insignificant clan. Although they have some experts, it is fine if they are destroyed. Why do you have to be so angry?" At this moment, Sher Dai was so angry that she hurriedly walked forward and shouted, "Li Yu, do you have any shame? Our Sher clan has never provoked you. Isn't it because my eldest sister doesn't like you and rejected you? You actually destroyed our Sher clan and captured our Sher clan's direct descendant. Don't you think that is too much?" The young man named Li Yu only just noticed Zhuowen. He did not even look at Zhuowen. His eyes fell on Sher Dai and he grinned. "Oh, so you are here. I have been looking for you everywhere and you have delivered yourself to my doorstep." Then, Li Yu suddenly rushed out and rushed toward Sher Dai. Divine power gathered in his right hand and he actually wanted to grab Sher Dai back. Sher Dai's pretty face changed greatly. She did not expect Li Yu to rush over without knowing the situation. The middle-aged man was so scared that his face turned pale. He did not expect Li Yu to rush out like this. When he wanted to pull Li Yu back, it was already too late. Li Yu had already approached Sher Dai. However, the moment Li Yu was about to reach Sher Dai, 4 sword lights rushed over and a golden light shield appeared on the surface of Li Yu's body. Unfortunately, the golden light barrier was useless against the 4 sword lights. It shattered into countless golden light spots. Poochie! Then, Li Yu's limbs were all broken. He fell to the ground in a sorry state and screamed miserably. "Ah! You bastard! How dare you attack me? Do you know who I am? You bastard!" Chapter 26:12. Absolute crushing. At this moment, the young man in white was surrounded by a divine sword that was condensed with thunder and fire. Just now, this divine sword had slashed out 4 times in an instant and cut off his 4 limbs. The middle-aged man's face suddenly turned gloomy. This young man in white had cut off his son's limbs in front of him. Obviously, he didn't give him any face. Zhuowen stepped on Li Yu's mouth, causing the guy's cursing to turn into a whimper. "Brother, aren't you going too far? Li Yu is the young palace master of our Liang Palace. How dare you act so recklessly? Are you looking down on our Liang Palace?" The middle-aged man said angrily. "I haven't punished this person yet. He actually dared to attack me in front of me. I'm already being merciful by not killing him on the spot." Zhuowen exerted force with his right foot and a circular airwave appeared under his foot. Li Yu's head was directly stepped into the ground, forming a big pit. Li Yu's struggling became much smaller. His whole body twitched and he screamed. "You are courting death." The veins on the middle-aged man's forehead burst. The dozen experts beside him turned into dozens of black shadows and shot toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen's mouth was full of a sneer. He stood still and didn't attack at all. The thunder and fire sword swept out like a shuttle and instantly turned into dozens of swords. The dozen experts who rushed out didn't even have the chance to make a sound before they were burned to ashes by the terrifying thunder and fire energy. At the same time, hundreds of Liang Palace cultivators had received the middle-aged man's order and attacked Zhuowen. These cultivators stepped in the air with mysterious steps and instantly formed an extremely terrifying joint formation. The divine power of hundreds of cultivators gathered together and formed an extremely huge starry sky giant. The starry sky giant held the starry sky giant sword and roared, slashing toward Zhuowen. The thunder and fire sword drew a trajectory in the air and instantly blocked in front of Zhuowen, slamming into the starry sky giant sword. Ka! Countless gusts of wind swept out like the most terrifying wind blades in the world. Large areas of Liang Palace's buildings were turned into ruins. Humph! You dare to be arrogant in front of this dragon lord? You're not qualified. Xiao Hei's cold voice rang out. Instantly, the lightning and fire energy converged to form a gigantic lightning and fire dragon. The starry sky giant sword was directly shattered into countless pieces by the thunder fire dragon, while the thunder fire giant was like a hot knife through butter. The moment it shattered the starry sky giant sword, it soared into the sky and heavily slammed into the starry sky giant. Rumble! A thunderous explosion resounded. The starry sky giant let out a blood-curdling scream. It couldn't withstand the bombardment of the thunder fire dragon at all. It completely collapsed. The moment the starry sky giant collapsed, hundreds of cultivators screamed and died, turning into lifeless corpses. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted as he stared at the scene in disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. The thunderfire sword returned to Zhuowen's side, while Zhuowen lifted Li Yu from under his feet. At this moment, Li Yu was on the verge of death. However, when he saw Zhuowen, he shouted, "You bastard, how dare you treat me like this? I'm the young palace master of Liang Palace. Disrespecting me is disrespecting Liang Palace. You'll eventually suffer the wrath of Liang Palace." Before Li Yu could finish his words, he realized that something was wrong. Logically speaking, the experts of Liang Palace should have already taken action when he was brutally beaten up by this person. Moreover, his father shouldn't just stand by and watch. Only then did Li Yu look at the middle-aged man. He noticed that his father was standing alone in front of him, trembling all over. His expression was filled with fear. Then, Li Yu's gaze fell on the surroundings and he immediately gasped. There were corpses piled up around him. Most of them were badly damaged by the lightning and fire energy. It was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Li Yu recognized these people because they were the experts of Liang Palace. However, they were all corpses now. Could it be that all of them were done by this white-robed young man? How was this possible? Father! Kill him, kill this bastard. Let him know the painful price of offending our Liang Palace. Li Yu screamed at the middle-aged man in front of him who was in a daze. However, Li Yu soon discovered that his father, the palace master of Liang Palace, revealed a look of fear. Then, he turned into a rainbow and fled towards Liang Palace. Father! Li Yu was a little stunned. His father was the palace master of Liang Palace. Could it be that he was afraid? Was it because of this white-robed young man? Xiao Hei! Zhuowen was expressionless. The thunderfire sword immediately followed Zhuowen's will and turned into a terrifying lightning and fire energy. It fiercely streaked across the void and rushed towards the middle-aged man who was fleeing. The middle-aged man seemed to have sensed something and roared. He flicked his finger and took out a divine weapon from his spiritual ring. The quality of each divine weapon wasn't low. One divine weapon after another blocked in front of the middle-aged man. Unfortunately, the moment these divine weapons touched the thunderfire sword, they seemed to spontaneously combust and were destroyed by the lightning and fire energy, turning into countless ashes. The middle-aged man was horrified. He suddenly took out a huge golden shield from his spiritual ring. The surface of the shield was covered with strange patterns. It was golden and emitted an ancient aura. Ding! The thunderfire sword shot over like a furious dragon and finally hit the shield. The thunderfire sword that was like a hot knife through butter stopped the moment it hit the shield. A crisp sound soared into the sky. The middle-aged man hid behind the shield. When he saw the shield blocked the thunderfire sword, he let out a sigh of relief. However, his heart was like a raging storm. This golden shield was given to him by the ancestor of Liang Palace. It was a life-saving item that could only be used in a life-and-death situation. He didn't expect that the white-robed young man didn't even make a move and the divine sword forced him to use his final trump card. Then, how terrifying was this white-robed young man? Break for me! At this moment, Xiao Hei floated above the Thunderfire sword. She stretched out a small claw and slapped the Thunderfire sword's body. Suddenly, the lightning and fire energy on the surface of the Thunderfire sword became extremely violent. It was like a rainbow piercing through the sun. Then, terrifying cracks appeared on the surface of the huge golden shield. Moreover, these cracks continued to spread and eventually covered the entire surface of the golden shield. Then, the golden shield completely shattered into pieces with a cracking sound. The middle-aged man hiding behind the golden shield didn't even have time to react. The Thunderfire sword had already pierced his chest and nailed him to the ground. The terrifying lightning and fire covered the middle-aged man's body, causing him to scream miserably. Even if the middle-aged man used the illusory sky bridge and ignited it to erupt his body's potential, it was still useless. The lightning and fire energy was like maggots that burned the middle-aged man's life force. Chapter 26:13. Underground Prison. Where are you keeping the Shi family members? Zhuowen looked at the dazed Li Yu and asked indifferently. Li Yu screamed, "Don't kill me! I'll tell you where the Shi family members are being held. Just don't kill me." Zhuowen looked at Li Yu quietly, waiting for the latter to continue. Li Yu was now extremely afraid of Zhuowen. He quickly told the location of the Shi family members to Zhuowen in great detail. Zhuowen nodded and looked at Shi Dai behind him. Shi Dai understood tacitly and immediately rushed towards the interior of Liang Palace. It turned out that Li Yu had imprisoned the Shi family members in his own underground prison. The underground prison was specially built by Li Yu for the purpose of torturing the people he captured and pleasing himself. Shi Dai walked in front while Zhuowen silently followed behind her. As for Crepe Myrtle Star and the green-haired corpse, they didn't follow. They just found a place outside Liang Palace to sit down and wait. After a while, Shi Dai arrived at Li Yu's palace. She followed Li Yu's instructions and opened the entrance to the underground prison hidden under his bed. The moment she entered the pitch-black underground prison, Zhuowen's divine sense had already scanned the underground prison. His brows furrowed and a trace of killing intent appeared in his eyes. Shi Dai was worried about the Shi family members, so she didn't use her divine sense to scan the underground prison. Instead, she rushed into the depths of the prison. When Shi Dai entered the deepest part of the prison, she couldn't help but scream. Zhuowen slowly walked out and threw Li Yu to the ground. Li Yu groaned in pain and curled up into a ball, shivering. The inside of the prison was filled with the smell of decay and blood. The originally blue stone floor was now dyed dark red with blood. It was a shocking sight. Cold crosses were placed on the four walls of the prison, and each cross had a woman hanging on it. Their limbs were all nailed to the crosses by thick nails, and fresh blood was constantly flowing down. Zhuowen even saw that some of the women on the cross were already dead. Their bodies were rotting and maggots were growing on them. In the deepest part of the crosses, there was an iron fence, and inside the iron fence were many women. These women curled up together like injured kittens, looking fearfully at Zhuowen and the others who had just barged in. "Second miss? Are you the second miss?" Suddenly, a timid voice came from the other side of the iron fence. It was a young maidservant. Her young and tender face was filled with sorrow and fear. Shi Dai finally came back to her senses and hurriedly came to the front of the iron fence. Looking at the young maidservant, she hurriedly said, "Jiu are you all right? Where is my elder sister?" "Gotcha." Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the iron fence was completely shattered. The woman inside was still curled up in the corner, looking at Li Yu, who had been tossed aside by Zhuowen, with fear in her eyes. Only the servant girl called Jiu came out shakily with Shi Dai's support. However, Jiu didn't dare to approach Li Yu. Even though Li Yu's limbs were broken, she was still afraid of this demon-like man from the bottom of her heart. Zhuowen shook his head inwardly. He didn't know how these poor women were treated in the dungeon to make them show such fear when they saw Li Yu. "Jiu, don't be afraid. Li Yu's limbs are broken. He's no threat to us. Tell me, where is my elder sister?" Shi Dai hurriedly asked. Jiu however, began to cry. She pointed at the cross in the corner and said, "Eldest Miss is there. Ever since she was captured by this demon, he has been torturing her every day." Shi Dai's heart skipped a beat. She immediately came to the cross in the corner. The woman on the cross had long hair that covered her face. Because her position was too remote, Shi Dai didn't notice her at first. When Shi Dai looked at the long-haired woman in front of her, the anger in her eyes flared up. This was because the woman's skin had been peeled off, and her entire body was covered in blood. Shi Dai parted her long hair and looked at the unrecognizable face under the long hair. Her tears flowed uncontrollably. Zhuowen stood behind Shi Dai. Looking at the woman's miserable state, he couldn't help but frown. This Li Yu really wasn't a good person. He was actually so vicious and ruthless. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that the woman had completely lost her vitality. She was clearly tortured to death by Li Yu. "Li Yu, I'm going to kill you." Shi Dai pounced at Li Yu like a madman. She took out a small knife from her spirit ring and stabbed it at Li Yu's chest. "No. Senior, you promised me that you wouldn't kill me." Li Yu was terrified and hurriedly asked Zhuowen for help. Unfortunately, Zhuowen's gaze was cold. He said indifferently, "I never said that. It's just your own wishful thinking that I won't kill you." Li Yu revealed a look of despair. Then, he saw Shi Dai's crazy face. Screams of despair resounded throughout the entire dungeon. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and summoned a flame, burning all the corpses in the dungeon to ashes. Shi Dai, on the other hand, was determined to leave her elder sister's corpse behind. She wanted to prepare a grand funeral for her elder sister. Zhuowen didn't refuse. Instead, he let Shi Dai take the Shi family members and leave Liang Palace first. When Shi Dai finished organizing the survivors in the dungeon, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He revealed a dignified expression. Shi Dai sensed Zhuowen's abnormality and asked, "What's wrong?" Just as Shi Dai finished speaking, the entire dungeon suddenly collapsed. Then, a huge palm descended from the sky and violently blasted the top of the dungeon. The dungeon collapsed. Intense light poured into the dungeon from the huge crack above. Then, a huge palm descended and finally landed above Zhuowen and the others. Shi Dai looked at the huge palm. Her entire body trembled and revealed a look of despair. This palm was too powerful. It was so powerful that she couldn't even muster the slightest thought of resisting. The only thought in Shi Dai's mind was whether the white-clothed youth in front of her could block this huge palm. Zhuowen indifferently raised his head and looked at the huge palm. With his hands behind his back, the thunder-fire sword turned into a flash of lightning and fire. It quickly swept over and slashed at the palm. Slash. A hole was directly cut open in the terrifying palm. Moreover, the hole grew bigger and bigger until it finally swallowed the palm. "Miss Shi Dai, you just need to bring the people and follow behind me." Zhuowen's gentle voice sounded. Shi Dai stared blankly at the back in front of her. She could only subconsciously nod. Seeing Zhuowen walk forward, she followed closely behind like a puppet. While following behind Zhuowen, the palm above once again condensed and slapped down. However, it was all destroyed by the Thunderfire Sword. Chapter 26:14. Block my move. The moment Zhuowen walked out of the dungeon, the entire dungeon collapsed with a loud rumble, turning into ruins. Not only that, but Li Yu's palace was also in ruins. There was no trace of the dazzling palace. In the sky above the ruins, the energy of lightning and fire seemed to burn the sky, enveloping the entire horizon. The Thunderfire Sword was like a rainbow as it shuttled through the lightning and fire. Every time it moved, dazzling sparks would pop out. Inside the lightning and fire, a stalwart figure was emitting rays of light like the rising sun. He was constantly resisting the attacks of the Thunderfire Sword. That's the Sunrise Palace's ancestor. He's an expert at the peak of the Void Sky 8-step. I remember that he was in seclusion. Now that he came out, he must have successfully broken through. Sure Dai looked at the stalwart figure inside the lightning and fire, then at Zhuowen. Her beautiful eyes revealed a worried expression. Zhuowen's expression was calm as he looked at the figure blocking the thunder-fire sword. His eyes revealed a hint of interest. If he wasn't mistaken, this Sunrise Palace's ancestors' cultivation had just broken through to the 9th step, half-step void sky 9-step. However, his strength was much stronger than an ordinary 9th step, half-step void sky 9 steps expert. It seemed like this person was not simple. However, Zhuowen was very clear about Xiao Hei's strength. Even if Xiao Hei was at the life enlightenment realm, he still had trump cards. Not to mention this Sunrise Palace's ancestor, who was only at the 9th step void sky 9 steps expert. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor had a head full of white hair and his eyes were filled with hostility. At this moment, the more he fought, the more frightened he became. He didn't expect the invader's divine sword to be so terrifying. Even he was at a disadvantage. Who the hell are you? Why do you want to kill my Sunrise Palace's people? Our Sunrise Palace has never provoked you, right? The Sunrise Palace's ancestor looked at Zhuowen and shouted in anger. My name is Zhuowen. Your Liang Palace's young palace lord, Li Yu, threatened to kill me. Your Liang Palace lord even sent out elites to surround and annihilate me. I didn't seem to have taken the initiative to provoke them, but they just had to provoke me. Zhuowen said in a calm tone. The moment the old man from Liang Palace heard the name Zhuowen, his mind went blank as if it had been struck by lightning. He had heard of Zhuowen's name recently. Although he had been in seclusion all this time, his servants would promptly inform him of major events in the outside world. Especially Zhuowen, who had suddenly risen to prominence in the Grand Clarity Immortal Realm. Not only had he killed the patriarch of the Mountain River Hall, Su Liang, but he had also killed the dozens of hall masters and the elite cultivators of the 100 halls who had come to besiege him. It could be said that Zhuowen had become famous after that battle. His name had spread throughout the entire Huaxia Heaven domain. Zhuowen's name represented a ruthless person that absolutely could not be provoked. Therefore, many major powers in the Huaxia Heaven domain would warn their successors to be careful of Zhuowen. Moreover, they would share Zhuowen's appearance with them so that they would remember his true appearance. I didn't expect it to be Lord Zhuowen. I have offended you. Please forgive me, Lord Zhuowen. I will leave now and no longer disturb you. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor quickly said. Zhuowen raised his head and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of an arc. He said, Where did your imposing manner of wanting to kill me just now go? I, Zhuowen, have never been someone who is afraid of trouble. Since you had the intention of killing me from the start, then I, Zhuowen, will naturally return the favor. This Sunrise Palace's ancestor clearly had the intention of killing Zhuowen in the dungeon. If it wasn't for the fact that Zhuowen was powerful, perhaps he would have already been buried in the dungeon. When the old ancestor of Liang Palace heard Zhuowen's name, he apologized and wanted to leave. Did he really think that Zhuowen was easy to bully? Did he think that he could come and go as he pleased? Stomp! Zhuowen stomped his right foot and shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. The aura on his body rose steadily. His long hair flew and his clothes fluttered. Originally, he only looked like an ordinary youth. However, at this moment, Zhuowen, who was releasing his aura, was like a peerless master. He was like a towering mountain that could not be reached. Zhuowen flicked his finger and a blood-red light flew out from his spirit ring. It turned into a blood-red divine sword. It was the Blood Immortal Sword. Zhuowen's left hand held the hilt of the Blood Immortal Sword and immediately rushed into the endless thunder and fire in the sky. Xiao Hei! Zhuowen's indifferent voice sounded. The thunder-fire sword that shuttled through the thunder and fire emitted a sword hum. It violently flew out and landed in Zhuowen's right hand. Zhuowen held the swords with both hands. One of them was surging with blood energy while the other was surrounded by thunder and fire. They floated in midair and looked indifferently at the Sunrise Palace's ancestor like a fiend god. "If you can block one of my moves, then I'll let you live." Zhuowen was expressionless as he said indifferently. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor's pupils constricted, and then his eyes revealed anger. He felt that the white-clothed youth before him was too arrogant. Although he had heard of Zhuowen's various battle achievements and knew that this person had caused a great commotion in the Taiqing immortal realm and had extremely terrifying strength, he was confident that he was still confident. Even if he knew that this Zhuowen's strength was terrifying, he believed that it wouldn't be a problem for him to block one of this person's moves. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor took out one divine artifact after another from his spirit ring. Moreover, he also took out various talismans and other items to block around him. Clearly, the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was extremely cautious about blocking Zhuowen's move. Zhuowen stood in front of the Sunrise Palace's ancestor and quietly waited. The Sunrise Palace's ancestor was making various preparations there. "Are you ready?" Zhuowen looked at the Sunrise Palace's ancestor, who was waiting solemnly, and asked with slight mockery. Sunrise Palace's surroundings were surrounded by countless brilliance. These were the brilliance produced by divine artifacts, talismans, and various other items. These items could be said to have been collected by him over the years. In order to block Zhuowen's attack, he could be said to have put in a lot of effort. "He's too arrogant." Moreover, he even said such big words. "When the time comes, he will definitely release the tiger back to the mountain." Shi Dai stomped her foot and snorted in a slight fit of anger. Shi Dai's strength wasn't strong. She had never heard of Zhuowen's name, so she didn't know how powerful Zhuowen was. However, she knew how powerful the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was. In addition to Zhuowen's big words, she believed that Zhuowen wouldn't be able to kill the Sunrise Palace's ancestor in one move. When the time came, the Sunrise Palace's ancestor would definitely escape. And if the Sunrise Palace's ancestor escaped and didn't die, it would be a huge disaster for her Shi family. With Zhuowen's strength, the Sunrise Palace's old ancestor might not dare to seek revenge. Furthermore, their Shi family was just a small family. If the Sunrise Palace's old ancestor were to seek revenge, he would only need to lift a finger and their Shi family would be finished. However, Shi Dai could only say these words in her heart. After all, this white-clothed youth helped her because of the space-time divine key. Chapter 26:15. The third space-time key. Liyang Palace's ancestor coldly looked at the white-clothed youth with a mocking smile. His heart was filled with anger as he coldly said, "Of course it's fine. After all, this old man is a half-step void sky ninth-step expert. Blocking one of your moves won't be a problem. When the time comes, you better keep your promise." "I, Zhuowen, always keep my word." Zhuowen's indifferent voice resounded. Shortly after, he crossed his arms in front of his chest and fiercely slashed forward. A blood-colored sword ray and a lightning-fire sword ray combined to form a cross-shaped slash. It soared through the heavens and earth as if it contained the entire heaven and earth. The instant the cross-shaped slash was unleashed, Liyang Palace's ancestor's expression completely changed. He actually felt an extremely dense threat of death from the cross-shaped slash. "This move is too terrifying. I can't take it head-on. Otherwise, I'll die without a doubt." Liyang Palace's ancestor roared in his heart. He was terrified. Then, he stomped his right foot and flew backward. He didn't plan to take Zhuowen's move head-on. However, the instant Liyang Palace's ancestor retreated, countless invisible ripples appeared around him. It was like an invisible rope that blocked his path, making it impossible for him to retreat. Ninth-level array? Who set it up? Liyang Palace's ancestor's expression was gloomy. Soon after, he looked at the white-clothed youth, who was still floating in the air. He knew that this guy must have set it up in advance. "I can only take it head-on," Liyang Palace's ancestor roared in his heart as he looked at the approaching cross-shaped slash. The divine force in his body swelled, and he even took out the illusory sky bridge and began to burn it. He was very clear that after feeling the terrifying aura of the cross-shaped slash, if he didn't go all out, he wouldn't be able to take it head-on. Like a meteor crashing into a planet, the cross-shaped slash cut through the sky and finally landed on Liang Palace's ancestor's body. Soon after, the entire horizon was filled with dazzling rays of light. Liang Palace's ancestor roared towards the sky as he watched the divine tools and talismans around him shatter one by one. He was still desperately burning the illusory sky bridge, hoping to stop the divine tools from shattering. Unfortunately, all of his efforts were in vain and in vain. In the end, when all the defenses were shattered, the illusory sky bridge shattered, and the Sunrise Palace's ancestor was on the verge of death. He raised his head with great difficulty, and through the end of the blazing light, he looked at the white-clothed young man that floated in the air like a god or devil from afar. He knew that he was too wrong. The existence in front of him was a terrifying existence that he could never hope to reach. It was just one move. He had made sufficient preparations, but he still couldn't block it. In the end, what he faced was the darkness of death. That person who caused a sensation in the grand clarity immortal realm really lives up to his reputation. Our Liang Palace's fate has come to an end after the old ancestor of Liang Palace spat out these words. He disappeared into the light. When all the light faded away, what was revealed was a dark and cold starry sky. It was boundless, and the old ancestor of Liang Palace had disappeared. So terrifying? Liang Palace's old ancestor died just like that? Dai slowly opened her mouth. She stared blankly at everything in front of her. After confirming that what she saw wasn't an illusion, she looked at the white-clothed young man with a complicated expression. Only now did she realize that the white-clothed young man wasn't boasting, but telling the truth. He really did have the strength to kill the old ancestor of Liang Palace in one move. Many cultivators in the vicinity of Sunrise Palace also saw this battle. They were all trembling as they looked at the white-robed young man who had killed the Sunrise Palace's patriarch with one move like a god. The Sure family members looked at the white-clothed young man with admiration. Some of them even crossed their arms in front of their chest as if they were praying. When Zhuowen landed in front of Dai again, Dai's attitude changed again. It became reverent and respectful. I've already successfully completed the task you've assigned to me. Shouldn't it be your turn to complete the task I've assigned to you? Zhuowen asked indifferently. Dai hurriedly lowered her head and said, My lord, regarding the space-time key you mentioned, it is indeed with me. However, because the space-time key involves too many things, I have been hiding it in the Sure family's secret ground. If my lord wants it, Dai will immediately find the space-time key and give it to you. Yes, my goal is the space-time key. I will go with you to the Sure family. Zhuowen nodded. Half a month later, Zhuowen drove the space-time roulette away from the Sure family's planet and flew towards the exit of China. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the deck with 3 keys floating in front of him. The 3 keys were almost identical in shape, but the colors were different. They were black, white, and red respectively. Although Zhuowen looked unusually calm, from the depths of his eyes, one could tell that Zhuowen's heart was not as calm as he appeared to be. I can feel the aura of the space-time beasts on these 3 keys. The green-haired mummy looked at the 3 keys in front of Zhuowen and murmured in a low voice. Zhuowen looked at the green-furred corpse cautiously. He still didn't know why the green-furred corpse was following him. So, Zhuowen was still very wary of the green-furred corpse. The green-haired mummy also noticed Zhuowen's vigilance. It shrugged and said indifferently, You don't have to be so wary of me. In my opinion, this thing is just SOSO. I have no interest in competing with you. The mummy sat down and stared blankly. Most of the time, the green-haired mummy was sitting there in a daze. Zhuowen felt that the mummy was recovering its strength. While the mummy was in a daze, Zhuowen could feel that the mummy was absorbing some kind of energy from the surrounding space. That energy was similar to the chaos he saw in the blood-stained horn. At least, it was an unknown energy that Zhuowen had never encountered before. I have heard of the spacetime key. I heard that if you gather 3 spacetime keys, you can enter the spacetime temple. Legend has it that the master of the spacetime temple, the spacetime master, is an expert who proved his Tao. If you can enter the spacetime temple, you will obtain an unparalleled opportunity. Purple Star Monarch looked at the 3 spacetime keys floating in front of Zhuowen with envy. Brother Zhuo, now that you have gathered 3 spacetime keys, when do you plan to activate them and enter the spacetime temple? Purple Star Monarch asked. Zhuowen thought to himself and said, I don't plan to enter the spacetime temple at the moment. I need to return to the Great Brahma domain and settle down my family and friends. I will only choose to enter the spacetime temple after I am completely free. Because I feel that if I enter the spacetime temple this time, I will probably stay for a very long time. Moreover, the 8 heavens are in troubled times now. If I don't settle down my family and friends properly, I will not be at ease. Purple Star Monarch nodded and said, Brother Zhuo, after I return to the Great Brahma domain, I plan to bid farewell to you. You want to go to Heaven's Moat? Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he asked. Purple Star Monarch nodded and said, Yes, to cultivate to my level, I can be considered to be standing at the peak of the 8 heavens. Moreover, I know the future path of cultivation of the 3 extremities. If I continue to stay in the 8 heavens, it will only limit my cultivation speed. Therefore, I want to go to the Xianmi heavenly domain. Brother Purple Star Monarch, after you go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, be careful. Your cultivation path has already left the human race and is approaching the sorcerer race. If it is exposed that you cultivate the sorcerer race's codex in the Xianmi heavenly domain, I am afraid it will be very troublesome, Zhuowen said worriedly. Purple Star Monarch nodded seriously and said, Thank you, Brother Zhuo, for your reminder. I know this. Chapter 26:16. Envoy. 2 months later, the space-time wheel entered the Great Brahma domain and landed in the One Snow Palace. Brother Zhuo, this is goodbye. If fate wills it, we will meet again in the Xianmi heavenly region. After landing in the One Snow Palace, the Purple Star Monarch cupped his fists to Zhuowen before leaving alone. Zhuowen did not try to keep him. He was clear that the Purple Star Monarch was a person with a firm will. Once he decided on something, he would never regret it. If he tried to keep him, it would be a waste of effort. Zhuowen stood in the One Snow Palace's quest hall with the green-haired corpse behind him. This combination was very strange and attracted the attention of many cultivators in the quest hall. Zhuowen casually strolled around the quest hall and found that the quest hall was even more complete than when he left. He secretly nodded in his heart. Zhuowen took out a communication jade talisman. When he was prepared to inform Chen Shui that he was back, a clear voice called out to him. Zhuowen turned around and looked at the beautiful girl behind him. He said with a smile, Qimei, you're also in the quest hall? The one who appeared behind Zhuowen was Tong Qimei. She had just finished handing in her mission when she saw Zhuowen. She immediately recognized him, so she called out to him. Big Brother Zhuo, why didn't you tell us that you were back? Tong Qimei said in an excited voice. Zhuowen revealed a faint smile and said, I was about to inform them when I met you. Tong Qimei was stunned. She stuck out her tongue and then led Zhuowen out of the quest hall, entering the One Snow Palace. After leaving for a while, Zhuowen came to the One Snow Palace again. He found that there were many more cultivators in the One Snow Palace compared to before, and the security was much tighter. I'll go call Master. Master is the temporary palace master of the One Snow Palace. Now that Big Brother Zhuo is back, Master will give the palace master position to you. Tong Qimei said with a smile while walking. Your master Waning Moon? Where's Chen Shui? Zhuowen asked with a frown. Tong Qimei stopped and looked at Zhuowen strangely. Brother Zhuo, you still don't know about that matter? What is it? I just came back, Zhuowen said. An envoy from the Xianmi heavenly region has arrived. This envoy has summoned the leaders of the 8 heavenly domains to the core of the 8 heavenly domains, Su's temple. Palace Master Chen Shui brought Senior Magatama, Master Yuezu, and the elites of Wen Shui Palace to Xiu's temple, Tong Qimei said. Zhuowen was stunned. He was no stranger to the Hu temple. It was indeed the core of the 8 heavens. It was a building that did not belong to any of the heavens. It was said that the origin of the 8 heavens was hidden within. Of course, this was only a legend. Zhuowen recalled the memories of Old Man He Fu. According to Old Man He Fu's memories, this space had originated from the mythological era on Earth. Earth was the origin, and the Hu temple had legends of its origin. He wondered if the two were related. Only one envoy from the Xianmi heavenly region has arrived? Zhuowen asked. Only one envoy has arrived so far. It is said that the true experts of the Xianmi heavenly region will arrive soon. As for whether it is true, I am not sure, Tong Qimei said. Zhuowen nodded and said, Qimei, don't spread the news of my return. I am still a little worried. I plan to make a trip to the Hu temple. Oh right. Before you leave, take this. After saying that, Zhuowen took out a black ball. This black ball was formed by the Devourer King's devouring power. It could be divided continuously, as long as it carried the devouring power he gave it. Zhuowen could follow the connection of the devouring power, and send the cultivator who carried the mark of the devouring power into the Devourer King's body. The Ryuka clansmen had developed well in the Devourer King's body. Therefore, Zhuowen was not worried about the Ryuka clansmen. He was worried about his friends in the Great Brahma Heavenly Region and Muqinshu. Remember, distribute this thing to those who are truly loyal to the Wen Shui Palace and those who are trustworthy. This thing can save your life at a critical moment, Zhuowen said in a serious tone. Seeing Zhuowen being so serious, Tong Qimei quickly nodded and said, Big Brother Zhuo, don't worry. I will take good care of this thing. Moreover, I will strictly select the ones you want. Zhuowen nodded. Soon after, he gave a few instructions and quietly left the Wen Shui Palace. He did not know why, but after hearing that Chen Shui was heading to the Hu temple, Zhuowen felt a little uneasy. It was because of this uneasiness that Zhuowen was in a hurry to leave the Wen Shui Palace and head to the Hu temple. Summoning the space-time roulette, the green-haired mummy jumped onto it. Zhuowen was too lazy to care about the green-haired mummy. He summoned Xiao He and left the Wen Shui Palace. This time, Zhuowen did not fly leisurely. Instead, he rushed out. He wanted to head to the Hu temple in the shortest time possible. After leaving the Wen Shui Palace for a day, Zhuowen stopped in front of a star, as if he was waiting for something. It didn't take long for the star to suddenly explode, and a colossal blood-red beast burst out from the star. Bloodscale, long time no see. Your strength has increased again. Zhuowen looked at the blood-red beast that rushed out from the star and said calmly. Zhuowen could feel that Bloodscale's strength was indeed much stronger than before. Moreover, Zhuowen could not see through Bloodscale's strength. The blood-red beast looked at Zhuowen and gradually shrunk. It turned into a blood-red clothed middle-aged man and quickly landed on the space-time roulette. The moment Bloodscale landed on the deck, he immediately noticed the green-haired mummy. He felt that the green-haired mummy had an aura that made him feel awe, which made him feel bewildered. Bloodscale, come with me to the Hu temple. Zhuowen did not plan on introducing the green-haired mummy to Bloodscale. He only told him the reason for his visit. Bloodscale nodded. He had a contract with Zhuowen, so he could be considered as Zhuowen's servant. Even if his strength had increased, he did not dare to betray him. He could only be Zhuowen's servant for 1,000 years. The core region of the 8 heavens was a cold and dark void. There was nothing in this void, not even the sun, moon, or stars. There were only pitch-black meteorite belts and unchanging darkness. In the middle of this void floated a dilapidated temple. This temple was so dilapidated that it looked like a ruin, as if it had not been repaired for a long time. At the top of the temple, a golden flame burned fiercely, as if guiding those who entered this void to this place. In the temple, a figure stood quietly with his hands behind his back. He looked at the void in front of him with a cold gaze. This figure was a middle-aged man with a face as cold as a knife. He was dressed in a black robe, and a powerful aura surged from his body. Upon closer inspection, this person's pores were constantly spitting out strange black mist. This black mist was like agile little snakes, circling around his body and making hissing sounds. It seems that the first guest is about to arrive. The cold man looked forward, narrowed his eyes, and muttered to himself. Whoosh! Chapter 26:17. Solicitation. The stern-looking man still had his hands behind his back. He slowly turned his head and narrowed his eyes at the figure that had appeared in the temple. The golden light receded to reveal an extremely handsome man with a golden bar between his eyebrows. He was the ruler of the Sakyamuni domain. Sakyamuni. You're the messenger from the Xianmi domain? Sakyamuni's eyes were cold as he looked at the stern-looking man. His tone was impolite and somewhat arrogant. Ignorant barbarian, judging from your aura, you must have just become a heavenly Tao master. Unfortunately, your Tao veins are extremely empty. You're clearly still a heavenly Tao master in the initial stages. You're the weakest heavenly Tao master. How dare you speak to me with such an attitude? The stern-looking man crossed his arms and looked at Sakyamuni with a mocking expression. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Sakyamuni had relied on Taoist Lord Tusida's Tao-confirming divine pill to successfully confirm his Tao. Not long after coming out of seclusion, he had received an invitation from the messenger from the Xianmi domain. That was why he had come to the Hu Divine Temple. Sakyamuni was a cultivator born and raised in the 8 great domains. He didn't have a clear understanding of the realm of Tao confirming. After knowing that he had successfully confirmed his Tao, he was naturally in high spirits. Although he knew that the messenger from the Xianmi domain should also be a Tao confirming expert, he was also a Tao confirming expert. Their cultivation levels were equal, so Sakyamuni's attitude was naturally quite arrogant. However, when he saw the stern-looking man's contemptuous expression, Sakyamuni was displeased. His eyes burst with terrifying killing intent and shot toward the stern-looking man like a sharp sword. The stern-looking man narrowed his eyes and stood still. Black chi floated around him and condensed into a huge pitch-black snake head in front of him. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Sakyamuni's killing intent was easily dispersed by this person's voice, and an aura much stronger than Sakyamuni's came crushing down on him. Sakyamuni let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but take a few steps back, looking at the stern man in shock. The cold-looking man retracted his aura and looked at Sakyamuni. Although you and I are both heavenly pathmasters, you don't know anything about the path-proving realm, and you don't have the corresponding cultivation method. If we really fight, I can kill you within 10 moves. Sakyamuni's heart trembled. He did not doubt the stern-looking man's words. After all, the stern-looking man could easily disperse his killing intent and injure him with his aura. This in itself proved that he was inferior to the stern-looking man. This jade slip contains a detailed explanation of the Tao-confirming realm, as well as a basic method to cultivate Tao meridians. It can help you consolidate the Tao meridians you have just developed. The stern-looking man waved his sleeve and threw a jet-black jade slip to Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni took the jade slip and was extremely excited. At the same time, he looked at the stern-looking man with some vigilance. Sakyamuni was no ordinary person. After cultivating for so many years, he knew very well that there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Not only did the stern-looking man tell him about his cultivation, but he also gave him the cultivation method of the path-proving realm. He did not think that the stern-looking man was being kind. The stern-looking man also saw Sakyamuni's vigilance and smiled. You don't have to be so vigilant. I still don't know your name. Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni said coldly. So you are the heavenly domain master of the Sakyamuni domain. No wonder your talent is so strong. You were able to succeed in the path-proving realm in a barren place like the 8 heavens by yourself. It is enough to show that your talent is outstanding. If you continue to stay in the 8 heavens, your talent will only be buried, said the stern-looking man. Sakyamuni frowned and said in a low voice, You mean you want to recruit me? Water flows downwards, people walk upwards. Do you want to stay in the 8 heavens forever? Also, the 8 heavens will not be peaceful soon. The chances of dying here are too high. I am just giving you a word of advice. The stern-looking man said with his hands behind his back. Since you want to recruit me, you should at least introduce yourself, right? Sakyamuni calmed down and said in a low voice. The stern-looking man nodded in his heart at how quickly Sakyamuni calmed down. Sakyamuni was not only talented, but also had a first-class temperament. The stern-looking man was also a heavenly Tao lord like Sakyamuni. In fact, the stern-looking man was even stronger than Sakyamuni. However, the stern-looking man was very clear that Sakyamuni's talent was much stronger than his. One had to know that with his talent, he could only barely cultivate to the heavenly Tao Lord level in the Xianmi heavenly domain, which was a high-grade region with rich starry sky energy. Moreover, it took him countless years to reach his current achievement. However, Sakyamuni had become a heavenly Tao Lord in the 8 heavens, which was a place with poor starry sky energy. The stern-looking man was very clear about the significance of this. Thinking about it from another perspective, if he was in the 8 heavens, he was very clear that even if he cultivated until the end of his lifespan, he would not be able to succeed. After all, cultivation required extremely high talent. If the upper echelons of their forces knew that he had recruited such a talented genius, they would probably reward him handsomely. Thinking of this, the stern-looking man's heart was filled with excitement. His gaze towards Sakyamuni also became softer and softer. You definitely don't know about the distribution of forces in the Xianmi heavenly domain. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sun Qi. I am a direct disciple of the White Rainbow Hall in the Xianmi heavenly domain's host region. Although White Rainbow Hall is not a Tao sect level force in the host region, it is much stronger than many ordinary forces in the host region. Speaking of the force behind him, Sun Qi's eyes revealed a trace of pride. Sakyamuni was a little surprised. The stern-looking man in front of him was a genuine Tao-confirming expert. His strength was even stronger than his, but he was only a direct disciple. Then how strong was the White Rainbow Hall behind this person? However, Sakyamuni quickly calmed down. Although it was not that the previous heavenly domain lords of the Sakyamuni domain did not go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, they left behind too little information about the Xianmi heavenly domain. Sakyamuni was not completely ignorant. At least he knew that the cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain were generally stronger than the 8 heavens. Now that he saw Sun Qi in front of him, Sakyamuni finally understood that the Xianmi heavenly domain was indeed stronger than the 8 heavens. Moreover, it was much stronger than he had imagined. Sakyamuni, if you are willing to join White Rainbow Hall, you can immediately become a direct disciple of White Rainbow Hall. Our White Rainbow Hall's Hall Master may even treat you as his successor. As Sun Qi said this, he looked at Sakyamuni. His eyes were burning with excitement. Although Sakyamuni was quite tempted, he still said calmly, Brother Sun, I don't think only your White Rainbow Hall knows about the great desolate heavenly domain, right? Chapter 26:18. Xianmi Heavenly Territory. How do you plan to deal with the gap in the Eldritch Heavenly Territory? Sakyamuni asked. Sun Qi smiled and said, I'm not too sure about this. I'm just here to check the situation, but it seems that this matter is quite serious. I'm afraid that the Xianmi Heavenly Territory will send an eternal level formation master to completely seal the gap. If this is true, then the gap in the eldritch heavenly territory is nothing to be afraid of. Unless the real Almighty of the eldritch heavenly territory comes, it's impossible to break the formation restrictions set up by an eternal level formation master. Sakyamuni listened silently, but did not answer. He was even more ignorant than Zhuowen about the Tao confirmation realm, and did not know what kind of expert an eternal level formation master represented. Of course, if it were not for the blood scales information, Zhuowen would know even less than Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni, I know what you're planning. To tell you the truth, because of the eldritch heavenly territory, the Xianmi heavenly territory has opened the passage to the 8 major heavenly territories. As you can see, many forces from the Xianmi heavenly territory will come during this period of time. In addition to scouting, we are indeed looking for talented cultivators. Speaking of this, Sun Qi's gaze was slightly complicated. He was a cultivator born in the Xianmi heavenly territory, and had always heard about the 8 major heavenly territories before. He also knew that the cultivation resources of the 8 major heavenly territories were much worse than those of the Xianmi heavenly territory. But when he really entered the 8 major heavenly territories, he realized how bad the cultivation environment of the 8 major heavenly territories was. In Sun Qi's view, being able to cultivate to the 9 steps void sky in the 8 major heavenly territories was already a good talent. Even if he cultivated in the 8 major heavenly territories, he was not confident that he could break through the 9 steps void sky. If one could rely on himself to succeed in the Tao confirmation realm, he was definitely a genius. Sun Qi naturally did not want to let go of such a genius. Sun Qi's Baihong Hall was very famous in the eastern Tao region of the Xianmi heavenly domain. It was like a crane in a flock of chickens among the many forces, but it had never been able to meet the requirements of a Taoist level force. In fact, the scale and foundation of Baihong Hall was already comparable to an ordinary Taoist sect. The only thing it lacked was top-notch experts. For an unranked force like Baihong Hall, if they wanted to become a Tao sect level force and establish their own Tao sect, in addition to the indispensable foundation and scale, they had to have a cultivator in the second step of Tao validation. The Hall Master of the White Rainbow Hall was the strongest person in the White Rainbow Hall, but he had only reached the peak of the first step of Tao validation. He was still some distance away from the second step. The White Rainbow Hall's Hall Master had been in seclusion for countless years, but he had never been able to break through. All the disciples of Baihong Hall knew that it wasn't that their Hall Master wasn't talented, but that he had a hidden illness and an incomplete Tao heart. That was why he couldn't break through. Therefore, Baihong Hall was now in great need of talented geniuses. If a cultivator in the second step of Tao validation appeared in Baihong Hall would immediately become a Tao sect level force. Establishing a Tao sect in the Xianmi heavenly domain was definitely a great honor. Not only that, but the Tao sect would also be favored by the heavenly Tao law of the Xianmi heavenly domain. It would form a unique heavenly Tao origin dragon vein within the sphere of influence. In the Xianmi heavenly domain, the amount of heavenly Tao origin dragon vein was related to the cultivation speed of Tao validation cultivators. It was closely related to the survival of any force. This was also why Sun Qi wanted to invite Sakyamuni after discovering that he had succeeded in Tao validation in a place like the 8 heavenly domains. With Sakyamuni's talent, Sun Qi believed that as long as he entered the Xianmi heavenly domain, his cultivation speed would be extremely terrifying. It would not be impossible for him to reach the second step of Tao validation. Even if Sakyamuni could not reach the second step of Tao validation, he would at least be able to cultivate to the level of Master Hunyuan. It would not be a bad thing for Baihong Hall to have a Master Hunyuan level expert out of nowhere. Maybe you still have a choice, but I still want to remind you that Baihong Hall is the most powerful force in the host domain besides the Tao sect level forces. Unless it is a Tao sect level force, your best choice is Baihong Hall. Sun Qi said. Sakyamuni nodded and looked at the starry sky outside the temple. He said lightly, I still have a question to ask. You mentioned Tao sect level forces many times. Is there a hierarchy of forces in the Xianmi heavenly domain? Sun Qi was startled and immediately nodded. Yes, the Xianmi heavenly domain is completely different from the 8 heavenly domains. Rather than calling it a heavenly domain, I think it is more accurate to describe it as an infinite world. In the Xianmi heavenly domain, there are countless forces, big and small, innumerable like locusts. Just like where there are people, there are naturally strong and weak forces. Forces are divided into 3 levels, namely Tao sect level, Tao mansion level, and Tao palace level. Forces below the Tao sect level are called ordinary forces. Our Baihong Hall is the force closest to the Tao sect level. As long as a second step Tao vindication expert appears, it will immediately be promoted to a Tao sect level force. Sakyamuni narrowed his eyes. He did not expect that Sun Qi's Baihong Hall was only an ordinary force in the Xianmi heavenly domain. A Tao sect level force was not the highest level force, but only the first level force. Didn't that mean that the Tao mansion level forces and Tao palace level forces above the Tao sect level forces had more powerful foundations and experts? Then will the Tao palace level forces send experts this time? Sakyamuni asked with a glint in his eyes. Sun Qi glanced at Sakyamuni, shook his head, and said, The Tao palace level forces stand at the peak of the Xianmi heavenly domain. In the entire Xianmi heavenly domain, there are only a handful of them. Every Tao palace level force is an absolute colossus, and they do not appear easily. Also, I heard that the gap in the primitive heavenly domain has been sealed by an expert in advance. This kind of thing really can't alarm the Tao palace level forces, but the Tao mansion level forces will definitely come. After all, only the Tao mansion level forces have an eternal level array Tao master. Hearing Sun Qi say that the Tao palace level forces would not appear, Sakyamuni was slightly disappointed. Sakyamuni was very ambitious. Since he had to choose a force, he naturally wanted to choose the strongest one. Sun Qi also guessed Sakyamuni's thoughts and secretly shook his head. Sakyamuni's talent was indeed powerful, but after all, he came from a small place like the 8 heavenly domains. His knowledge was shallow, and he did not know the vastness of the Xianmi heavenly domain. He also did not know that the Xianmi heavenly domain was filled with even more monstrous geniuses than him. In Sun Qi's opinion, Sakyamuni's talent was not enough to attract the attention of a Tao palace level force. Even a Tao mansion level force might not even take a fancy to them. Even if the Sakra heavenly emperor was given the cold shoulder and entered a Tao mansion level force, he would probably only be an outer sect disciple that wasn't valued and would be treated poorly. On the other hand, Sun Qi's main concern was the Taoist level forces. For a genius like the Sakra, the Tao Palace and Tao Palace level forces wouldn't pay much attention to him, but he would definitely attract the attention of the Taoist level forces. If a Tao sect level force extended an olive branch to Sakyamuni, Sun Qi knew that Baihong Hall would not be able to compete at all. Thinking of this, Sun Qi's heart sank, but he did not dare to force Sakyamuni. Chapter 26:19. Gathering, someone else is here. Sakyamuni, take a seat. Once the representatives of the 8 heavens have gathered, I'll explain the situation of the antediluvian heaven and the gap. I'm sure you don't know much about the antediluvian heaven, right? Sun Qi looked at Sakyamuni. Indra glanced at the flowing light in the starry sky outside the temple. He nodded and walked to the front of the table that had been prepared in the temple. The stream of light landed in front of the temple and revealed a slightly stooped old man. The old man held a walking stick and walked unsteadily, as if he had one foot in a coffin. Sakyamuni looked at the stooped old man and raised his eyebrows. He was no stranger to this old man. He was old Lord Tusita's younger brother, old man Qing Lao. His cultivation was also at the extremities of life and death, but he was weaker than old Lord Tusita. After old Lord Tusida's death, Old Man Qing Lao naturally became the ruler of the Tusita heaven. Old Man Qing Lao greets the Xianmi heaven emissary. Old Man Qing Lao coughed a few times and looked at Sun Qi with his cloudy eyes. He trembled and cupped his hands, his expression full of awe. Old Man Qing Lao was not a blind person. The aura of this cold-looking man was as vast and boundless as the sea. He couldn't see through it at all. How could he not know that this person was a Tao-confirming expert? And take a seat first. Sun Qi looked at Old Man Qing Lao indifferently and closed his eyes to rest. His attitude was completely different from his attitude towards Sakyamuni. The moment Old Man Qing Lao arrived at the temple, Sun Qi could see that he didn't have much time left. Old Man Qing Lao had spent so many years cultivating to the extremities of life and death. In Sun Qi's opinion, his talent and potential were ordinary, so he didn't bother to talk to Old Man Qing Lao. Old Man Qing Lao could also see Sun Qi's indifference. He cupped his hands and sat not far from Sakyamuni, looking at Sakyamuni in surprise. He actually felt an aura similar to Sun Qi on Sakyamuni. However, Sakyamuni's aura was restrained, making it difficult for Old Man Qing Lao to determine Sakyamuni's cultivation. Old Man Qing Lao recalled the rumors of old Lord Tusita's death and was full of hostility towards Sakyamuni. Sakra faintly glanced at Old Man Qing Lao, and the corner of his mouth revealed a disdainful expression. After Tao confirming his Tao, Hesus' heavens. Even when old Lord Tusita, the unfettered one, and the other celestial lords joined forces, he didn't think much of them. Even Taiching, whom he had always been wary of, was no longer as fearful as before. So what if Taiching was mysterious and powerful? As long as you're not a Tao-confirming expert, you're just an ant in his eyes. Soon after, the people in charge of Limitless Light Domain, Yama Domain, and Mahasvara Domain arrived. However, the people in charge of the three heavens were even weaker. They were only in the death realm, and were even weaker than Elder Qing Lao. Sun Qi frowned. In Sun Qi's opinion, these three were indeed more talented than Old Man Qing Lao, but there was a limit. Baihong Hall had many cultivators with such talent, but they were only ordinary disciples. Even if they entered Xianmi domain, it would be difficult for them to confirm their Tao. At this moment, there were 5 people sitting at the round table in the center of the temple. Sakyamuni was resting with his eyes closed. He was waiting for Zhuowen to appear. Zhuowen killed Great Brahma and became the Lord of Great Brahma's heavens. Now that he received Sun Qi's invitation, he had to come. If he didn't come, he wouldn't be giving face to the messenger. Sun Qi would find trouble with Zhuowen even if he didn't do anything. It could be said that whether Zhuowen came or not, Sakyamuni's fate was already sealed. Of course, if he could kill that little bastard himself, Sakyamuni would be more than happy. Whoosh! Another 2 streaks of light shot over, revealing 2 beautiful figures. They were 2 graceful women. One of them was tall, but her face was covered with a veil and her eyes were slightly closed. As for the young woman standing beside the veiled woman, her appearance could be said to be peerless and devastatingly beautiful. Even Sun Qi couldn't help but be dazed for a moment when he saw this woman. Sun Qi rarely saw such a beautiful woman even in Xianmi domain, but he actually saw her in such a remote corner of the 8 heavens. "May I ask which heavens you represent?" Sun Qi rarely asked. Among the 5 people who came, only Sakyamuni could make Sun Qi take the initiative to speak. Sun Qi didn't even want to talk to the other 4. 6 Desires Heavens, Lord of Heavens, Yao Xiangjuan. The beautiful woman's red lips parted slightly. After she finished speaking, her beautiful eyes fell on Sakyamuni, who was sitting in the temple, and she didn't hide the killing intent in her eyes. Sakyamuni slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Yao Xiangjuan in front of him, and a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said indifferently, "Your cultivation is quite fast. You've already reached the two extremities of life and death. It should be because of the heaven's origin, spring white snow, right? You were lucky that I didn't notice you, so you took advantage of the loophole to escape. But since you took the initiative to come here today, don't even think about escaping from me." After he finished speaking, Sakyamuni closed his eyes again. Yao Xiangjuan's cultivation speed really surprised him, but that was it. If he wanted to kill Yao Xiangjuan now, he could do it with a flip of his hand. It could be said that Sakyamuni didn't care much about Yao Xiangjuan, and even if he wanted to take action, he couldn't do it now. He could only wait until Sun Qi finished this meeting. Otherwise, he would lose face for Sun Qi. Sun Qi frowned as he looked at Sakyamuni and Yao Xiangjuan, who were confronting each other, and said in a deep voice, "Sit down first." Yao Xiangjuan nodded and sat opposite Sakyamuni with Palace Master Jingyun. Her beautiful eyes stared at Sakyamuni. She still couldn't forget the scene when Sakyamuni killed Palace Master Wuju. She once swore that if she succeeded in her cultivation, she would avenge her master. She didn't disappoint. Relying on the six desires' heavenly domain's origin, spring white snow, her cultivation improved rapidly and reached the peak of the two extremities of life and death. In her opinion, Sakyamuni should be a half-step heavenly law master. The gap between her and Sakyamuni wasn't big. Coupled with her trump card, she knew that she might have a chance to defeat Sakyamuni. After waiting for a while, Sakyamuni opened his eyes and looked at the starry sky outside the temple. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. He knew that the people from the great Brahma domain were coming. "Looks like we're going to meet this little bastard again. This time, I must eliminate all future troubles." Chapter 26:20. Like water and fire, the stream of light shot out from the cold and empty starry sky at an extremely fast speed and soon landed in the divine temple. The stream of light faded away, revealing three figures. The one in the lead was also a peerless beauty. The woman wore a pale white robe, and her long hair draped over her waist like a stream of light. Her beautiful face revealed a cold aura. This woman's appearance was absolutely rare in the secular world. She was almost the same as Yao Xiangjuan. Moreover, this woman's temperament was too cold, like a snow lotus at the peak of a snowy mountain. On the contrary, she added a trace of charm and attraction compared to Yao Xiangjuan. The moment Sun Qi saw the woman, although he was mentally prepared, he was still dazed for a moment. He couldn't help but ask, "Are you representing the Huaxia heavenly region or the Great Brahma heavenly region?" Sun Qi had investigated the 8 heavenly regions in advance, so he naturally knew the general situation of the 8 heavenly regions. Now that the representatives of 6 heavenly regions had come, only the Huaxia heavenly region and the Great Brahma heavenly region were left. He asked this question. The cold woman said indifferently, "I'm representing the Great Brahma heavenly region to come to the Hu Divine Temple." Sun Qi nodded and made a gesture of invitation. The cold woman led the 2 people behind her to sit down naturally. Sakyamuni narrowed his eyes and stared at the cold woman. He said indifferently, "Mu Chenxue, I didn't expect you to come. Is that Zhuowen going to be a coward?" Although Sakyamuni had never met Mu Chenxue, his clone Yang Yi was Mu Chenxue's senior brother, so he was no stranger to Mu Chenxue. Sakyamuni also found that Mu Chenxue's cultivation had already reached the life and death extremes. He also didn't know why, but he felt that there was an unknown power in Mu Chenxue's body. Although he felt this power, he couldn't be sure what it was. Sun Qi, on the other hand, looked at Mu Chenxue differently. Sun Qi's eyes were filled with surprise, doubt, and a touch of greed. However, Sun Qi was a scheming person. He quickly hid the strange look in his eyes. The people in the temple did not notice Sun Qi's strange look. Mu Chenxue coldly glanced at Sakyamuni, her brows furrowed. Although Sakyamuni's aura was faintly discernible at the moment, she could feel a shiver from Sakyamuni. Mu Chenxue was very clear about her own strength. Ever since she had awakened the mysterious phoenix bloodline in her body, her cultivation speed had been extremely fast. Before Zhuowen had left, she'd relied on the life and death pill to advance into the extremes of life and death, and she'd even relied on the heaven-defying effects of the phoenix bloodline to break through in a short period of time and attain a cultivation at the quasi-heaven Tao Lord realm. Mu Chenxue was very clear about how terrifying the phoenix bloodline in her body was. Although her cultivation was only at the quasi-heaven Tao Lord realm, she was very clear that her strength was much stronger than ordinary quasi-heaven Tao Lord. As for how strong she was now, Mu Chenxue herself was not very clear. After all, there were no Tao validation experts in the 8 heavens. Even quasi-heaven Tao Lords were very rare. Ever since she'd broken through to the quasi-heaven Tao Lord realm, she hadn't really fought with her full strength. Moreover, she'd already guessed that Sakyamuni would attend the invitation from the Xianmi Sky Region's emissary. The reason she'd accepted the invitation so fearlessly was naturally because she was confident in her own strength. However, Mu Chenxue frowned when she saw Sakyamuni. She'd noticed that Sakyamuni had the aura of a Tao validation expert. Although she'd deliberately concealed it, her perception was much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Mu Chenxue hadn't expected Sakyamuni to succeed in her Tao validation. However, she wasn't afraid. Although she wasn't very clear about how strong she'd become after completely awakening her phoenix bloodline, she didn't think she'd be suppressed by Sakyamuni, who'd just attained her Tao validation. Sakyamuni, you'd better think before you speak. My husband has something to do and can't come, so I'm temporarily acting as the ruler of the Great Brahma Sky region. Moreover, if he really comes, killing you will be as easy as blowing off dust, Mu Chenxue said indifferently. The other cultivators at the table sneered when they heard Mu Chenxue's words. They'd heard of Zhuowen's name and knew that he'd destroyed the Great Brahma Sky region in one move. However, they knew very well what kind of person the Great Brahma Sky region was. Not only was he ranked last among the rulers of the Sky region, but his strength was also inferior to theirs. He was only at the life enlightenment realm and could be said to be very weak. In their opinion, if they were to face the Great Brahma Sky region, they could also destroy him in one move. Therefore, Mu Chenxue's words were simply nonsense to them. However, Yao Xiangjuan took another look at Mu Chenxue. She hadn't expected that this beautiful woman in front of her, who wasn't any weaker than her and had an even colder temperament than her, was actually Zhuowen's Tao companion. No wonder Big Brother Zhuo couldn't forget her back then. She does have such charm. Yao Xiangjuan couldn't help but think of Zhuowen's figure in the space-time quicksand river. A trace of bitterness rose in her heart. However, it was only bitterness. She also admired Mu Chenxue in her heart. Yao Xiangjuan had quite a good impression of Zhuowen, but it wasn't to the extent of falling in love with Zhuowen. Now that Zhuowen had saved his Tao companion, Yao Xiangjuan was happy for Zhuowen. In Yao Xiangjuan's opinion, she and Zhuowen were more like close friends. Sakyamuni gave a cold snort, but he didn't say anything. However, he looked at Mu Chenxue as if he was looking at a dead person. Clearly, in Sakyamuni's eyes, Mu Chenxue was no different from a dead person. Are you little sister Xiangjuan? Zhuowen had mentioned you in front of me before. Mu Chenxue turned her head slightly and looked at Yao Xiangjuan not far away, greeting her with a smile. Yao Xiangjuan nodded and said in an embarrassed voice, "Hello, big sister Chenxue. Back then, my master treated big brother Zhuo." Mu Chenxue waved her hand and said, "It's all in the past. You can't decide what happened back then. Moreover, Zhuowen doesn't blame you, so you don't need to worry about it." Yao Xiangjuan excitedly nodded and said, "Many thanks big brother Zhuo and big sister Chenxue. I was still worried about how to explain it to big brother Zhuo." Mu Chenxue revealed a faint smile before sending a sound transmission. "Little sister Xiangjuan, your main goal in coming here should be to take revenge on Sakyamuni, right?" Yao Xiangjuan wasn't surprised that Mu Chenxue had guessed her goal in coming here. Sakyamuni had killed Palace Master Wu Ju and destroyed the Six Desires Palace, causing the Six Desires heavenly region to fall into deep trouble. This grudge was irreconcilable, and the cultivators of the Eight Heavens knew about it. It was natural for Mu Chenxue to guess it. "It's best if you don't act rashly," Mu Chenxue said in a serious voice. Yao Xiangjuan was stunned and asked back in a surprised voice, "Big Sister Chenxue, is there a problem?" Chapter 26-21. Dao Root. Yao Xiangjuan's pupils shrank. It was a good thing her mind wasn't bad, so she calmed herself down and replied in a voice filled with disbelief, How is this possible? It's very hard to prove one's Tao in the Eight Heaven domains. Did Sakyamuni really succeed? It's definitely true. My perception is quite sharp, and when I came to the temple, I could feel a trace of Tao aura from Sakyamuni. This Tao aura is much stronger than a half-step heavenly Tao master, Mu Chenxue said in a serious voice. Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes focused as she revealed a bitter look. She had relied on the heaven domain's spring white snow to increase her cultivation by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of the life and death realm. Although she was not as strong as Sakyamuni, at least the gap between them was not that big. But she never would have thought that Sakyamuni would succeed. She knew that with her current strength, she could not compare to Sakyamuni at all. Then what should we do? With Sakyamuni's personality, he'll probably make a move after the temple conference. Yao Xiangjuan was a bit panicked. Mu Chenxue calmly said, "Little sister Xiangjuan, do you believe me? If you're willing to believe me, then follow me after the conference." Yao Xiangjuan looked up and met Mu Chenxue's calm eyes. Her panicked heart calmed down a bit as she said with a strong nod, "Big Sister Chenxue, I believe you." Mu Chenxue revealed a faint smile. "You can just follow me when the time comes. Let's listen to what the envoy has to say." Yao Xiangjuan nodded and did not send any more sound transmissions. She just silently sat in front of the table. "Is there no one from the Huaxia heaven domain coming?" After waiting for a while, Sun Qi was a bit impatient as he coldly said. Sakyamuni also knit his brows. Huaxia heaven domain's Tai Ching had always been a large worry in his heart. Now that he had proven his Tao and his strength had increased, he naturally hoped to meet Tai Ching again and fight with him. Sakyamuni was brimming with confidence, and he wasn't particularly fearful of his greatest enemy. He believed that even if Tai Ching had a powerful trump card, the difference in cultivation couldn't be made up for by trump cards. This time, he planned to trample Tai Ching under his feet. Sun Qi waited for a while, but his face became more and more unsightly. Then he stopped waiting and walked to the main seat of the table, saying coldly, "It seems that the Tianyuan realm of Huaxia wants to test my patience. Well, since no one from the Tianyuan realm of Huaxia is coming, then forget it. I'll tell you first." Everyone at the table looked at each other, some of them gloating in their hearts. They knew that the three liquidators of the heaven realm of Huaxia had thoroughly offended this emissary. This emissary was a genuine Tao-confirming powerhouse. If such a powerhouse was angered, it would be very terrifying. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. He had interacted with Tai Ching the most and more or less understood his personality. If Tai Ching had received Sun Qi's invitation, it was impossible for him not to come. After all, Tai Ching was more cunning and scheming than him. It was impossible for him to do such a stupid thing. But the reality was that no one from the Tianyuan realm of Huaxia came. I think everyone has heard of the heavenly moat. On the other side of the heavenly moat is the ninth heaven, which is called the Xianmi heavenly domain. Maybe you don't know that in addition to the Xianmi heavenly domain, there is an extremely powerful heavenly domain called the prehistoric heavenly domain. There is no human race in the prehistoric heavenly domain, but there are many non-human races, such as the Devouring Clan, the Witch Clan, and so on. And this time, I came to the 8 heavenly domains for the prehistoric heavenly domain. Next, Sun Qi began to patiently explain the dangers of the Xianmi heavenly domain and the prehistoric heavenly domain. In the 6 desires heavenly domain of the 8 heavenly domains, there was a gap between the prehistoric heavenly domain and the 8 heavenly domains. At this moment, this gap was still sealed, but if it was opened, then countless terrifying races from the prehistoric heavenly domain would descend, and the 8 heavenly domains would be utterly unable to stop the terrifying races from the prehistoric heavenly domain. After all, in the prehistoric heavenly domain and Xianmi heavenly domain, the void heaven realm was the lowest level of existence, and Tao affirmation realm ferocious beasts could be found everywhere. Once the prehistoric heavenly domain invaded, then the 8 heavenly domains would be utterly unable to stop it, and they would be annihilated in a short period of time. The reason Sun Qi had come to notify the rulers of the 8 heavenly domains was to take away the humans in the 8 heavenly domains that possessed Tao root. After all, even though the 8 heavenly domains were extremely barren of energy, there were quite a number of humans, so perhaps a few extremely talented geniuses would appear. Sakyamuni was the best example. Sun Qi knew that it would be slightly difficult to recruit Sakyamuni. After all, Sakyamuni's cultivation was on par with his own, and the latter was extremely ambitious, so he might look down on the White Rainbow Hall. However, it was very easy to recruit those cultivators that were still weak. The Xianmi heavenly domains cultivation system was much more complete than the 8 heavenly domains, and it was much more advanced. In the Xianmi heavenly domain, once a cultivator's cultivation reached the heavenly god realm, they would be able to roughly determine their future accomplishments and whether they would be able to smoothly attain the Tao. Because in the Xianmi heavenly domain, all the cultivators that were able to smoothly attain the Tao possessed Tao roots within their bodies, and Tao roots could give birth to Tao veins that allowed them to continue cultivating after attaining the Tao. Tao veins could absorb the quintessence of the heavenly Tao and refine it into their own Tao aura, allowing them to become one with the heavenly Tao in battle and be able to borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at will. It was precisely because they could borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at any time that they were on a completely different level from cultivators below the Tao affirmation realm. This was also the reason why Tao affirmation realm experts were extremely rare in the 8 heavenly domains. Because the 8 heavenly domains didn't have a systematic method to test their Tao roots, and they didn't know how to unearth true geniuses. Coupled with the fact that the 8 heavenly domains were barren of star energy. If one wanted to cultivate and attain the Tao in the 8 heavenly domains, then it was simply 1 in a million, and the probability was simply too small. Which one of you is willing to follow me to the Xianmi heavenly domain? But let's make a deal first. I'll only take cultivators with Tao roots, and I won't take cultivators without Tao root. Sun Qi spoke in a deep voice. Cough cough. Emissary Sun, according to what you said, the Xianmi heavenly domain can determine whether a cultivator has the talent to attain the Tao in advance, but we still have some doubts. Why don't you demonstrate it for us to see? Old man Qing Shui coughed and spoke. The others revealed curious expressions as well. This was the first time they'd heard of Tao root. In their countless years of cultivation, the 8 heavenly domains had judged a cultivator's talent by their cultivation speed. Those who cultivated quickly naturally had high talent, and those who cultivated slowly naturally had low talent. Sakyamuni revealed a curious expression as well. This was the first time he'd heard of Tao roots as well, and he really wanted to see if any of them possessed Tao root. Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan revealed curious expressions as well. Sun Qi flicked his finger and took out an irregular crystal from his spirit ring. Chapter 26-22. Testing the Tao root. Tao roots are divided into grades as well, and they're respectively heaven, earth, dark, and yellow. The highest grade is the heaven grade Tao root, and the lowest is the yellow grade Tao root. It's practically impossible for those without Tao roots to attain the Tao, said Sun Qi indifferently. You go first. Sun Qi pointed at the old man as he spoke. It was this old man who'd suggested testing the Tao root. Even though the old man seemed to be old and weak, he was extremely interested in testing the Tao root. So, he stood up while a trace of spirit appeared in his muddy eyes. "Place your right hand on the testing stone," said Sun Chi. The old man nodded and placed his right hand on the crystal. After that, Sun Chi started to chant, and then the translucent and crystalline testing stone started to change. The crystal emanated a trace of yellow light. However, the yellow light was extremely weak, and it was like the afterglow of dusk. It was filled with the aura of someone past their prime. It's barely in Tao root, but it's very weak. It can probably only be called a pseudo-Tao root. Sun Chi's indifferent voice resounded while his gaze carried disdain. Pseudo-Tao roots could be found everywhere in the Xianmi heavenly region. It was very difficult for cultivators that possessed pseudo-Tao roots to attain the Tao by themselves unless a great figure spent a great deal of effort to help them attain the Tao by force. However, this was an arduous and unrewarding task. After a cultivator with a pseudo-Tao root was forcefully attained by a great figure, their cultivation would forever remain at the Heaven Tao Lord realm, and they would be unable to advance in their entire lifetime, let alone break through. However, Sun Chi didn't reveal his disdain. After all, the old man was the person in charge of the Tusita heavenly region. If Sun Chi wanted to recruit people from the Tusita heavenly region, then he had to rely on the old man's ability to rally people. The old man frowned when he saw the results of the test. Obviously, he wasn't satisfied with the result. It was obvious that the old man's natural talent was very ordinary, and it was probably very difficult for him to attain the Tao. After that, Sun Chi went to test the Tao roots of the three people in charge of the Boundless Radiance Heavenly Region, Yama Heavenly Region, and Mahasvara Heavenly Region. He noticed that they were only slightly stronger than the old man and had barely attained the yellow-grade Tao root. "Let me give it a try." Yao Xiangjuan was very interested and started to test it as well. The crystal suddenly emitted a blazing yellow light, and when the yellow light reached its peak, it suddenly changed into a cyan color. Although the green light wasn't as intense as the yellow light, it was still dazzling enough. Sun Chi's eyes lit up, and he gazed at Yao Xiangjuan with pleasant surprise as he said, "It's actually a profound grade ancestral Tao root. Miss Yao, it's truly a waste of your natural talent not to head to the Dark Valley Heavenly Region. Come back with me, and my White Rainbow Hall will definitely place emphasis on fostering you. In the future, your cultivation will at least be at the level of Lord Chaotic, and perhaps you'll be able to break through to the second step of the Tao validation." Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes were also filled with excitement, but she quickly calmed down and said, "If you can help me kill Sakyamuni, why can't I follow you back to the White Rainbow Hall in the Xianmi Heavenly Region?" Sun Chi's brows knit together tightly. Sakyamuni was the person he thought highly of the most. As far as he was concerned, Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root was at least at the profound grade, and he naturally didn't want to miss the opportunity to recruit such a genius, let alone deal with Sakyamuni. Yao Xiangjuan noticed Sun Chi's dilemma as well, and she grunted coldly before sitting back down without saying a word. Sun Chi was slightly helpless, yet his gaze descended onto Mu Chinxue, and there was a different expression in the depths of his eyes. "Miss Mo, would you like to take the test as well?" asked Sun Chi. Mu Chinxue refused resolutely. "There's no need. I'm clearly aware of whether I possess a spirit vein or not." Sun Chi glanced deeply at Mu Chinxue, yet he didn't force her. He looked at Sakyamuni instead because amongst all of them, he was actually the one who looked forward to Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root the most. "I'll take the test as well." Sakyamuni nodded, and then he walked over to Sun Chi and covered the crystal with his right palm. In just an instant, yellow light shot into the sky, and then the yellow light swiftly changed into green light. Moreover, the green light grew more and more dazzling, and it even surpassed the intensity of the green light Yao Xiangjuan emitted during her test. Sun Chi's eyes lit up, and then he noticed to his pleasant surprise that the bright light suddenly shot into the sky and slowly turned brown. Only when the color had completely turned brown did the light slowly recede. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. The crystal had only changed color 3 times, yet ancestral Tao roots had 4 grades. In other words, his ancestral Tao root could only be considered to be an earthly grade ancestral Tao root, and it hadn't attained the heavenly grade. However, Sun Chi was truly shocked. He hadn't expected that Sakyamuni's natural talent would be so formidable and actually possess an earthly grade ancestral Tao root. After all, earthly grade ancestral Tao roots were 100% capable of stepping into the second step of the Tao advancement so long as one didn't perish on the way. I must take this fellow into the White Rainbow Hall, no matter the cost. Sun Chi's eyes revealed a wisp of bright light, and his gaze towards Sakyamuni grew even brighter. At the same time, there was a wisp of gloominess in his gaze. He was very clearly aware that he'd already occupied the initiative when he came to the 8 great heavens this time, and he was absolutely unwilling to let such a genius like Sakyamuni slip by. If Chunshi was taken by another power, then it would absolutely be a huge loss to the White Rainbow Hall. He decided to invite Sakyamuni again. If Sakyamuni didn't know what was good for him, then he could only make a move and annihilate Sakyamuni. After all, annihilating such a genius with his own hands was better than falling into the hands of another power. Sakyamuni's perception was extremely acute, and he'd sensed Sun Chi's killing intent at the instant he revealed it. Sakyamuni thought for a moment and understood Sun Chi's thoughts at this moment. Sakyamuni, so long as you agree to join the White Rainbow Hall, then I promise that you'll definitely become the successor of the White Rainbow Hall in the future. Besides that, I've already sent a message to our hall master regarding your matters, and he's willing to make you the successor. Sun Chi suppressed the excitement in his heart and extended another invitation to Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni fell into silence. He was very clearly aware that if he refused again, then he would stand on the opposite side of Sun Chi, and that was absolutely unwise. After all, he'd just attained the Tao, and his cultivation hadn't stabilized. Moreover, Sun Chi had attained the Tao much longer than him, and Sun Chi possessed many trump cards. If they really fought, then Sakyamuni knew that he wasn't a match for Sun Chi at this moment. Sakyamuni was silent for a moment, but then he smiled and said, "I'm honored to join the White Rainbow Hall." Sun Chi was startled. He didn't expect Sakyamuni, who'd tactfully refused him before, to agree so readily now. He was overjoyed and didn't think about the contrast between Sakyamuni's attitude before and after. "Haha. Sakyamuni, don't worry, if you join our White Rainbow Hall, we'll do our best to cultivate you in the future and help you step into the second step of Tao validation as soon as possible." Sun Chi laughed. Sakyamuni just nodded slightly, but then he looked at Mu Qinshui and Yao Xiangjuan and said with a smile, "Senior brother Sun, when the time comes, you're welcome to come to the Sakyamuni domain to recruit people, but before that, I may have to deal with some grievances." Sun Chi was startled, but he quickly recovered and looked at Mu Qinshui and Yao Xiangjuan and said with a smile, "Do you need my help?" Sakyamuni grinned and said, "There's no need to trouble senior brother Sun with such trivial matters." Yao Xiangjuan and Mu Qinshui's expressions changed drastically. They didn't expect such a thing to happen. Looking at Sun Chi's appearance, they were afraid that he was going to help Sakyamuni. Chapter 26-23. The Phoenix Bloodline Emissary Sun. This isn't right, right? It was you who invited us here. Is this how you treat your guests? Mu Qinshui spoke rather calmly. Yao Xiangjuan even said furiously, "Emissary Sun, you're being biased." A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of Sun Chi's mouth, and he said indifferently, "Young missus, I didn't make a move, and I'm just keeping watch for the two of you. This divine temple is an ancient ruin after all. What if the two of you accidentally destroy this divine temple?" As he spoke, Sun Chi flicked his sleeve, and a terrifying energy of the Tao surged out explosively and instantly enveloped the entire divine temple. Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful faces turned gloomy when they sensed this energy of the Tao enveloping them. Sun Qi was a peak expert at the Heaven Tao Lord realm after all, and he was able to mobilize the energy of the Heaven Tao. The energy of the Heaven Tao that covered the surroundings of the divine temple was extremely formidable, and they might not be able to blast it open even if they joined forces. Sakyamuni glanced at Sun Qi as well. Merely this move of Sun Qi's was something he was unable to accomplish. Moreover, he was able to sense that the energy of the Heaven Tao that Sun Qi grasped was much stronger than him. However, Sakyamuni didn't feel dejected. After he found out that his ancestral Tao root was an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root, he knew that he was a genius even in Xianmi Heaven region. So long as he headed to Xianmi Heaven region, he was very clearly aware that he would be able to surpass Sun Qi with ease, and he would be able to attain a state that even Sun Qi had to look up to in the end. Merely based on the importance Sun Qi attached to him, it was obvious how rare and formidable his ancestral Tao root was. Sun Qi glanced at Mu Chenxue and Yao Xiangjuan with slight pity instead. These two women's appearances were extremely rare even in the Xianmi heavenly domain. Moreover, these two women's Tao roots were not bad. Unfortunately, Sakyamuni, who possessed an even higher grade ancestral Tao root, had chosen his Baihong Hall, and there was enmity between Sakyamuni and these two women. So, it was naturally impossible for Sun Qi to help these two women, nor did he intend to take them into his Baihong Hall. After all, now that he had a better choice, he could naturally abandon these two women at any time. He just felt that it was a pity. When Elder Qing Lao and the other three saw this scene, they were all shocked and bewildered. Especially when they realized that Sun Qi had used the power of the Way of the Heavens to seal the temple, the four of them were even more terrified. Facing a Tao-confirming powerhouse, the four of them didn't have the slightest courage to resist. "The four of you, come to my side. How about we leave together after the three of them have settled their grudges?" Sun Qi said with a smile. Elder Qing Lao and the other three naturally didn't have any objections. They gathered around Sun Qi and stared fixedly at Sakyamuni, Mu Chenxue, and Yao Xiangjuan. They had a feeling that Sakyamuni wasn't simple. Especially when Sakyamuni stood up, the Taoist rhyme emanated was extremely powerful. Even though it wasn't as powerful as Sun Qi's, it wasn't too far off. Could it be that Sakyamuni has succeeded? Elder Qing Lao was surprised and bewildered as he muttered with a frown on his face. "Sakyamuni, you killed Palace Master Wujue and destroyed my Six Desires Palace for no reason. You're truly too ruthless." Palace Master Jingyun glared at Sakyamuni furiously. Sakyamuni sneered and casually slapped out a palm towards Palace Master Jingyun. Even though the golden palm was only around 3 meters in size, the aura on it was extremely terrifying. Especially the Taoist rhyme that emanated from it, it seemed to be able to affect one's mind. Palace Master Jingyun's expression changed drastically. She actually trembled in front of the golden palm and couldn't muster up any thoughts of resistance. "Uncle Master Jingyun, watch out!" Yao Xiangjuan cried out and stood in front of Jingyun. She formed a seal with her jade-like hands and slapped the empty space. Immediately, the empty space distorted and surged out like a torrent, smashing against the golden palm. Boom! The golden palm was stopped by this invisible force for a moment. However, it was quickly crushed by the invisible force and continued to attack Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan gritted her teeth and her entire body was wrapped in milky white energy. Then, the milky white light condensed and turned into a 3-foot-6-inch guqin. This guqin was the heavenly domain's heavenly domain source, spring white snow. Dong! Yao Xiangjuan's jade-like hands gently plucked the strings of the guqin. Waves of guqin music surged out and slammed into the golden palm. Then, Yao Xiangjuan kept plucking the strings of the guqin. The waves of guqin music were more terrifying and powerful than the previous one, and Yao Xiangjuan kept retreating. When she retreated nearly 100 steps, she stepped on the ground and plucked the strings of the guqin again. Suddenly, the guqin music was earth-shattering. Like a violent storm, it slammed into the golden palm. The golden palm, which had been weakened by the guqin music again and again, completely collapsed into countless golden light spots under the last wave of guqin music. Yao Xiangjuan's face was pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her beautiful eyes were full of horror. She didn't expect that Sakymune's casual move would force her to use all her strength to barely block it. "You have indeed succeeded in proving your way," Yao Xiangjuan said gloomily. Palace Master Jing Yuan hurried to Yao Xiangjuan with an apologetic look in her eyes. At the same time, she also regretted it. If she had known that Sakyamuni had already proven his way, she wouldn't have asked Yao Xiangjuan to accept Sun Qi's invitation. Yao Xiangjuan comforted her softly, indicating that this matter didn't matter. At this moment, Mu Chenxue came to Yao Xiangjuan's side and asked, "Little sister Xiangjuan, are you all right?" Yao Xiangjuan forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little injured. It's nothing serious." Mu Chenxue shook her head. Although Yao Xiangjuan's injuries didn't seem serious, Mu Chenxue could sense that Yao Xiangjuan's injuries weren't light. She had already suffered serious internal injuries. "Yuezu, Magatama, the two of you take little sister Xiangjuan and retreat," Mu Chenxue said in a deep voice. Yuezu and Magatama, who had been following behind Mu Chenxue, exchanged glances. Both of them could see the worry in their eyes. Although they knew that Mu Chenxue's cultivation was very high and she was very strong, as far as they knew, Mu Chenxue was only a half-step Heavenly Tao Master. She was still half a step away from becoming a Heavenly Tao Master. Although it was only half a step, it was like a heavenly moat that was unreachable. They didn't know that Yao Xiangjuan could barely take a casual move from Sakyamuni. They knew that Mu Chenxue was stronger than Yao Xiangjuan, but no matter how strong she wasn't a true Heavenly Tao Master. However, this was Mu Chenxue's order after all, so they had no choice but to obey. Big Sister Chen Shui isn't Sakyamuni's match. "I'll go with Big Sister Chen Shui," Yao Xiangjuan quickly said. However, as soon as Yao Xiangjuan finished speaking, she looked at Mu Chenxue's back in front of her in shock. She saw that Mu Chenxue's body was surrounded by flowing flames. Following the clear cry of a phoenix, Mu Chenxue's aura began to increase, becoming more and more terrifying. The flowing flames quickly moved around Mu Chenxue's body. It was like a cycle of reincarnation, condensing into the image of a phoenix. Mu Chenxue was inside the fire phoenix. It was like she was wearing a beautiful coat of fire phoenix. She suddenly soared into the sky and charged at Sakyamuni. Chapter 26-24. A sword soared through the sky. Sakyamuni was surprised by Mu Chenxue's aura that had suddenly risen explosively. This aura was so strong that it was practically on par with his own aura. What's going on with Mu Chenxue? How many years has it been since we last met? She's actually changed so much. Sakyamuni thought in his heart as he took a step forward. Golden light erupted from his entire body, and he seemed like a golden statue that was covered in golden armor. Rumble! Sakyamuni instantly flashed over, and his fist was like a rainbow that shot through the sky, and it smashed towards Mu Chenxue's chest. Mu Chenxue's beautiful eyes were cold while flames flowed throughout her body. She opened her palm and lightly stretched it out. The flames that covered her palm possessed an extremely terrifying temperature, and the surrounding air was scorched to the point of being distorted and collapsed. Bang! Their attacks collided, and it caused a terrifying airflow to arise. Space collapsed endlessly, and strong winds swept through the surroundings like the sharpest blade. The entire Hu Divine Temple shook violently under the terrifying wave of air, and it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. The four of them let out muffled groans as they retreated incessantly, and they directly retreated to the edge of the temple. If it wasn't for the barrier that Sun Chi had set up at the edge of the temple, all four of them would have been blasted out of the temple. It wasn't just the old man, the four of them on Yao Xiangjuan's side were in an extremely sorry state as well. Only Sun Chi stood on the spot without moving with his hands behind his back, and he stared unblinkingly at the battle before him. Sakyamuni and Mu Qinshu each took over 10 steps back, and both of them revealed solemn expressions. I underestimated you. Your cultivation is at most at the half-step heavenly Tao Lord, but the bloodline in your body isn't ordinary, and it's actually capable of improving your combat strength to such a terrifying extent. Sakura spoke coldly. Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes were cold as she said, I didn't expect you to have successfully attained your Tao. Originally, I came here with the intention of killing you, but I didn't expect such an unforeseen event to occur. Sakyamuni laughed and said, My goal is similar to yours. I came here to kill that Zhuowen. Unfortunately, not only is that guy a coward, he even asked a woman to stand up for him. Calling him a coward is too apartment. You're not allowed to insult my husband. You're courting death. Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes were filled with killing intent. She stomped her foot and swept towards Sakyamuni like a waterfall across the sky. The Phoenix Phantom let out a deafening and clear cry. Invisible sound waves spread out and actually affected the barrier set up by Sun Chi. Bang bang bang! Sakyamuni and Mu Qinshu fought once more, and the aftershock from their battle grew more and more terrifying. It actually affected the entire Hu Divine Temple and the barrier in the surroundings. On the other hand, Yao Xiangjuan and the others resisted the aftershock with great difficulty, and they watched with shock as the battle between Mu Qinshu and Sakyamuni continued. How formidable! Yao Xiangjuan gazed at Mu Qinshue's figure with shock. She hadn't expected that Zhuowen's Tao companion would actually be so formidable. She'd seen Zhuowen fight in the past, and the gap between Zhuowen and Mu Qinshu wasn't just a little bit. Of course, Yao Xiangjuan hadn't seen Zhuowen for a very long time, so she was naturally unaware that Zhuowen's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds during this period of time. Especially Zhuowen's King Devourer, his strength had arrived at a freakish state. Crack! Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the surface of Hu Divine Temple, and even the barrier around it started to shatter and collapse. Rumble! The Hu Divine Temple finally couldn't withstand the battle between Sakyamuni and Yao Xiangjuan, and it completely collapsed. The barrier around it was also completely shattered. Qing Jiu and the others quickly escaped from the Hu Divine Temple, and they looked at the ruins of the Hu Divine Temple with lingering fear. Yao Xiangjuan had already led Jingyun, Yuezhu, and Magatama out of the Hu Divine Temple in advance. Bang! After the 8 of them left the Hu Divine Temple, the ruins of the Hu Divine Temple suddenly exploded, and Mu Qinshu and Sakyamuni fought like ferocious beasts again. It was an earth-shattering battle, and the sun and moon seemed to have lost their light. The battle was extremely terrifying. Sun Chi waved his hand, and the ruins above were easily dispersed by him. He quietly watched the battle between Mu Qinshu and Sakyamuni, and his eyes flickered, as if he was weighing something. Boom! Mu Qinshu and Sakyamuni separated again, and the contempt on Sakyamuni's face was no longer present. He looked deeply at Mu Qinshu and said, Mu Qinshu, your strength is not bad, and you are qualified to receive my strongest attack. Once I've killed you, I'll naturally go look for Zhuowen and kill him as well, so as to avoid future troubles. At this point, Sakyamuni's killing intent soared to the sky, and immediately, behind Sakyamuni, golden rings of light appeared, densely packed, and there were thousands of them. From these golden rings of light, various powerful divine weapons flew out, and each of them was shining with a golden light, and it was difficult to look at them directly. Thousands of golden divine weapons rushed towards Mu Qinshu like a flood. From afar, it looked like a golden river, and it was extremely magnificent. Mu Qinshu was not to be outdone. The phoenix silhouette on her grew even more solid, and then Mu Qinshu stepped into the air, and terrifying flames spread in all directions, immediately turning into a sea of fire. Bang! 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 The golden river collided with the boundless sea of fire, and dazzling sparks erupted. Sakyamuni sneered. He formed a seal with both hands, and suddenly pointed with his right hand. Immediately, the golden river pierced through the sea of fire like a rainbow, and directly blasted towards Mu Chinchua's heart. Mu Chinchua's expression changed slightly, but she did not panic. Instead, she pointed at her forehead with her right hand, and the mark of a flaming phoenix appeared on her forehead. Afterwards, the boundless sea of fire in the surroundings actually began to change, and formed silhouettes of phoenixes. Although these silhouettes of phoenixes were much smaller than the ones on Mu Chinchua's body, their power could not be underestimated. The silhouettes of phoenixes were like moths to a flame, and they completely blocked the terrifying attack of the Golden River. Sakyamuni frowned slightly, and snorted coldly. He took a step forward, and followed the Golden River into the sea of fire. Afterwards, he formed a seal with his right hand and shouted, "Condense!" The silhouettes of golden divine weapons fused together, and in the end, they landed in Sakyamuni's hand. At a closer look, the weapon in Sakyamuni's hand shone with golden light, and it seemed like a sword, but it was not a sword. The hilt of the weapon was golden, but the blade was blood-red, and the blade was covered in dense runes. "This is the Emperor's sword that I have refined for countless years, and after fusing with countless void sky divine weapons, it finally took shape. The moment I confirmed my Tao, it also comprehended its own Tao, and became a Tao-confirming divine weapon. Today, I will use you as a sacrifice to my sword." Sakyamuni gently stroked the divine sword in his hand, and then with a wave of his hand, the silhouettes of phoenixes that surged towards him were instantly destroyed. Bang! 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 Sakyamuni swung his sword again, and all the silhouettes of phoenixes in front of him could not stop his sword at all. A sword across the sky, and there was nothing it could not destroy. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.